Chapter 1007. Bah, this scriptwriter is sick in the head. He made up stories about Her Majesty. I really want to rush into the TV and beat him up. A young and pretty girl hugged a bag of chips, lying on the bed and watching a TV series on her phone. She angrily hit the bed with her fist, and the facial mask on her face almost fell off. Nowadays, 9 out of 10 scriptwriters are retarded, and there's even one who's still online. I told you not to watch these messy dramas, but you insisted on watching them. Aren't you torturing yourself? A lazy voice came from the neighboring bed. What are you watching? Time Travel to Fall in Love with You, the most popular male lead. Speaking of this, her expression stiffened, as if she had swallowed a fly. Chin, do you know what the plot of a TV series is? The royal family is too kind not to kill these nonsense scriptwriters. My Majesty, the TV series turned into a vicious and scheming female supporting character. She's so stupid as if she forgot to give birth to her uterus. The eternal emperor turned into a retarded and black-hearted lotus. It was an insult to her intelligence. The neighboring bed named Chin rolled her eyes. Anyway, it's all fake. They can act however they want, the royal family doesn't care, so why is Min so serious? Jiang Qin, Gu Min dragged her voice and muttered, these plots can easily mislead children. If Her Majesty was the idiot in the TV series, how could she have swept the world? I don't expect these scriptwriters to have good history, but at least they have some professional ethics. Jiang Qin was wearing teddy bear pajamas, lying on the bed with her legs crossed, looking indifferent. Television dramas are things that are meant to entertain people. Under the premise of respecting history, they can imagine anything. Jiang Qin searched the bed and found a bag of chips. She threw it to Gu Min. Although their plots are a bit ridiculous, no scriptwriter would dare to fabricate things of principle, such as maliciously discrediting the previous emperors, changing dynasties, etc. Gu Min caught the bag of chips and turned off her phone. She was annoyed at the thought of the retarded plot. TSK, if it was 100 years ago, who would dare to make up the royal family like this? Wouldn't they be killed? Jiang Qin smiled. It's a society ruled by law. Murder is against the law, even the royal empress. Gu Min rested her chin on her hand. You're right. When I become a screenwriter in the future, I'll definitely correct the culture of the industry and restore history. She was a student majoring in film and television literature at Tianhua University. Her future career goal was to be a screenwriter. Jiang Qin said, that's quite an ambition. Gu Min said, Chin, do you think I should use Emperor Chen as the main character for my first movie? Her idol was definitely someone who could punch Nanshan Jing far away and kick Beihai Kindergarten. Jiang Qin chewed on the chips in her mouth with a slightly amused expression, but she also gave a serious suggestion. Empress Chen is too controversial. It's not easy to adapt her. I don't recommend new screenwriters to use her as the main character. Both historians and the royal family could prove that Emperor Chen came from a noble family, but no one knew why he became a bandit. Not only did she become a bandit, but there were also records of her slaughtering her siblings and her biological father in the history books. However, the unofficial history books also said that she was born from Gu Zhen and a wild man. There were even a few wild men who were analyzed. Her family background was very complicated, and her growth was even more tortuous. It was too difficult for a new screenwriter to use Emperor Chen as the main character. It's precisely because it's challenging that we have to clear Her Majesty's name. There are too many screenwriters with no professional ethics now. Ever since Emperor Chen's tomb was opened to the public, the television and online dramas are getting more and more ridiculous, Gu Min muttered angrily. Chin, have you ever thought about what history would be like without Her Majesty? It definitely wouldn't be as good as it is now. Jiang Qin did not speak. Her gaze darkened. Emperor Chen's tomb was open to the public. The royal family was still around, but Emperor Chen's tomb was open to the public. It was a joke. The royal family's prestige for 300 years was gone. Jiang Qin said, don't worry, these screenwriters will be dealt with sooner or later. By the time you clean up the atmosphere, it will be too late. The royal family voluntarily handed over their power and changed the feudal monarchy to a constitutional monarchy. Although they were forced by external forces, it was more of a strategy for the royal family to protect themselves, adapt to the times, and advance by taking a step back. Handing over a portion of their power did not mean that the royal family could be controlled by others. Gu Min hugged the thick history book and gnawed at it. Halfway through, she said, "Chen Chen, huh? Don't you think that Emperor Chen might be a time traveler?" The more she studied the history of that period, the more she felt that her emperor was arrogant. She had the urge to kneel down at any moment. Jiang Chen said impatiently. "I don't know if she's a time traveler. I only know that if you don't sleep now, you will ascend to immortality. Look at the time." Gu Min looked at the time. It was 3:00 in the morning. She was so scared that she quickly lifted her blanket. Tomorrow is the class of the old scumbag, Lu Shi. I'm screwed. She did not know how much Lu Shi's parents hated their son to give him such a name. Lu Shi was 29 years old, single, and had no girlfriend. He was given the nickname Old Scumbag. Lu Shi was also a history professor at Tianhua University. She wondered if he would feel awkward when he talked about the history of Emperor Chen's parents. Jiang Chen could not help but laugh. However, the smile on her face did not last long. Her phone, which she rarely used, rang. She unlocked her phone and walked barefoot to the bathroom in the corridor. She opened the door and went to the bathroom. "Hello? Crown Prince Huichang, something bad has happened. Emperor Chen's tomb is abnormal." The main tomb's dome suddenly collapsed. A cold light flashed in Jiang Chen's eyes. How could the tomb's dome suddenly collapse? She turned around and went back to the dormitory. In order not to disturb Gu Min's sleep, she did not even turn on the lights. She grabbed her things and went out in her pajamas. As soon as she left the campus, Jiang Chen found that the sky was unusually dark. She looked up and felt that something was wrong with the sky. "Doesn't it look like the alignment of the 9 stars?" A clean male voice came from behind. Jiang Chen turned around with a sullen face. A tall man in a suit walked out of the shadows. "Professor Lu Shi." Lu Shi adjusted the gold-rimmed glasses on the bridge of his nose. His eyes were calm, as if he was not surprised by Jiang Chen's appearance in her pajamas. "The alignment of the 9 stars is a rare sight," Lu Shi said. "But it happened once more than 300 years ago. The professor is waiting for someone here?" Jiang Chen calculated the time and wanted to send Lu Shi away. "No, I'm waiting for you." Jiang Chen did not show it on her face, but she frowned in her heart. "I don't seem to know the professor." "It doesn't matter if you know him or not. I just want to give you something." If it was any other time, Jiang Chen would have thought that he was interested in her. But in the current situation, she only felt that it was dangerous. "What is it?" Lu Shi took out something from his pocket and handed it to Jiang Chen. "It's returned to its owner." Jiang Chen was surprised. She took the thing and could barely recognize that it was a yin-yang fish jade pendant. Lu Shi's body heat still lingered on it. "Returned to its owner? It's not mine." Jiang Chen wanted to return the jade pendant, but Lu Shi looked up at the sky and smiled. "The 9 stars are aligned." "What?" The alignment of the 9 stars didn't last long, and soon they were separated. At that moment, Jiang Chen's phone rang again. It was the ringtone she had set for Gu Min's phone. "Chen Chen, where are you?" Gu Min's voice sounded extremely panicked. "I'm at the campus gate." "Don't move." "Chen Chen, don't move. I'll go find you. Also, don't go with Lu Shi." A hint of surprise flashed across Jiang Chen's eyes. Gu Min should be sleeping in the dormitory. How did she know that Lu Shi was there? Not long after, Gu Min stopped her bicycle in front of the two of them. The sudden braking made a sharp sound. She was still in her pajamas. Nothing had changed, but Jiang Chen somehow felt that her aura was much stronger. Slap. Under Jiang Chen's shocked gaze, she took a few steps forward and slapped Lu Shi across the face. The force was so strong that half of Lu Shi's face became red and swollen. Jiang Chen was speechless. What development? Gu Min glanced at Jiang Chen and saw the jade pendant in her hand. She quickly snatched it and threw it at Lu Shi's face. Lu Shi. She cursed. F***CKU. Min? Lu Shi didn't get angry. Instead, he laughed as if he wasn't the one who had been slapped. Are you still human? Gu Min was so angry that the veins on her forehead were bulging. Her expression was a bit ferocious. Why did you give this stupid jade pendant to Chin Chin? Why did you trick her into bringing it to the tomb? What are you scheming in your stomach? Tell me. Don't play dumb. Lu Shi smiled bitterly. If I said that I didn't do anything, would you believe me? Tell that to a ghost. Gu Min said angrily. If I believe you again, I'll write my name backwards. Jiang Chen watched the situation unfold. Her brain couldn't wrap itself around it. When did Min Min become so close to Professor Lu Shi? Those things. I really didn't do them, Gu Min laughed. What nonsense are you trying to lie to me now? Can you listen to my explanation? It'll only take about 3 minutes. Okay, kneel and explain. As usual, prepare your own washing board. After Gu Min finished speaking, she took a deep breath and turned to look at Jiang Chen. She thought that she had forgotten her roommate's face after traveling through time for almost 30 years. When she woke up from the nightmare, she found that she remembered clearly. She even remembered every detail of the stupid dramas she had complained about with her roommate before she traveled through time. Chin Chin, let me deal with this scumbag first. I'll beat him to death. Jiang Chen frowned. What did he do to you? Gu Min said, he's worse than I am. Seeing the strange atmosphere between the two, Jiang Chen was worried, but she trusted Gu Min. Although Gu Min was slender, she was very good at fighting. If you can't handle it, remember to call me. Jiang Chen said that, but in her mind, she wanted to go back and investigate Lu Shi. Kneel. Now you can explain. Gu Min was upset, but she also knew that they were arguing outside of Tianhua University. If they were accidentally photographed by a night owl, they might become famous on the internet. So, she decided to change their location and went to Lu Shi's apartment. Lu Shi said, there's only a washing machine at home. There's no washing board. I'll take the keyboard. Gu Min saw his obedient look and his familiar eyes. Her heart ached uncontrollably. She forced herself to hold back. Tell me, Lu Zhongqing. I'd like to hear what you have to say. Lu Shi said, Min, do you still remember what happened when you first discussed marriage? Of course I remember. I should have randomly chosen a man to marry. Which one of them wouldn't be better than you, Lu Zhongqing? Lu Shi smiled bitterly. I really worked hard back then, but I didn't study hard enough and wasted too much precious time. But your marriage could only be delayed by 2 years. One day, when I was studying late into the night, an immortal suddenly appeared outside my window and gifted me with a miraculous elixir. He said that if I ate this, my future studies would be as good as having been blessed by the gods. At that time, I was really anxious and tried everything I could think of. If you can give me 3 to 5 years, I will definitely marry you in a just and honorable manner. But... Gu Min sneered. Then what? Then you, Lu Zhongqing, took the elixir and opened your conception and governing vessels. You became a straight-A student? Do you think this is a xianxia or wuxia drama? A cannon fodder who can't even make a splash in history wants to become the main character. Lu Shi shook his head and whispered, it's not like that, then what's going on? Gu Min's patience was running out. To Lu Shi, he had waited for a long time. To Gu Min, the memories of her previous life had just happened. She had just passed away from an illness filled with resentment. She had forgiven Lu Shi before she died, but now that she had transmigrated back, there was no need to forgive. Can you say everything in one sentence? Lu Shi stammered, Min, I'm not a human, I know you're not a human. You're a ghost. I've known you for more than 20 years and slept with you for nearly 10 years, but I realized that I never understood you. This is my failure. I deserve to be deceived by you because I couldn't protect my child. If you were a human, how did Dalong and Erlang die? Gu Min was so angry that she stood up. She looked like she was about to break down. Her youthful face lost its restraint. She grabbed Lu Shi's suit fiercely. Her face was full of tears, and she sobbed in a low voice, Lu Zhongqing, I still want to believe you now, but I was blinded by greed. Chapter 1008. 3,000 heavy cavalrymen and 10,000 light cavalrymen charging at each other. What a spectacular and shocking scene it was. The viewers in the live stream watched everything from a bird's eye view, and this scene had the greatest impact on them. Jiang Pengji seized the initiative. The people of the North Borderline were passive in defense, but they soon displayed the qualities that a nomadic people should have. Their reaction quality was admirable. The sixth prince heaved a sigh of relief when he realized that Jiang Pengji's cavalrymen numbered no more than 3,000. What was the use of 3,000 cavalrymen charging into an army of more than 100,000? Moreover, these cavalrymen were all wearing heavy armor, and their horses were also covered in fish-scale armor. How fast could they move? The terrain of the northern frontier was relatively flat, and it had a natural advantage for the highly mobile light cavalry. This terrain also allowed the cavalry's roundabout tactics to be used to the greatest extent. In comparison, the speed of the heavy cavalry was a notch lower, and their marching speed was also slower. The cavalry of the northern borderline was as fast as the wind, coming and going without a trace. Even if they were robbed of the initiative, they would still be able to gain the upper hand by bypassing the front of the heavy cavalry and circling to the enemy's two weak flanks. The North Borderline knew about Jiang Pengji's plan in advance because of the spy who had pretended to surrender. They simply avoided the frontal attack and attacked the two weaker flanks. Seeing that the battlefield was stabilized, the sixth prince immediately felt reassured. The grassland was the world of the three tribes of the northern borderline. It was also the home ground of the cavalry of the northern borderline. If they fought head-on, Jiang Pengji and the others would return in defeat. Fu Wang sneered, idiot, he couldn't take care of the entire battlefield, but when he learned that the northern borderline cavalry had avoided a head-on charge and turned to attack the weak point, he knew that the northern borderline would suffer a great loss. It was true that 3,000 ordinary cavalrymen charging into an army of 100,000 might not cause much of a stir, but this was heavy cavalry. The spectators who were overlooking the entire battlefield were able to see it more directly. Glutinous rice ball warrior, is the northern borderline too poor to form a cavalry unit? Feng Yi Yuran Chu, #picknose, isn't the northern borderline a poor countryside? Can't you see that their cavalry is basically made of rattan armor? The audience lived in an era of information explosion. If they wanted to know something, they could just search the internet. Ever since they knew that Jiang Pengji was going to fight with the northern borderline, many viewers had looked up the relevant history. Light cavalry had the advantages of light cavalry, speed and mobility. Heavy cavalry lost their advantage in speed, but their destructive power increased. Drunken Cloud Cat Demon, the northern borderline is vast, and there is more room for light cavalry to survive. The cost of forming heavy cavalry is too high. Of course, they wouldn't choose heavy cavalry that would cost a lot of effort. It wasn't that they were ignorant, it was just that the northern borderline didn't have the soil for the development of heavy cavalry. They only remembered the speed of the light cavalry, but they did not know the cutting formation and destructive power of the heavy cavalry. Guikai Guofeng Shao, Tisk, TSK. I feel sorry for the northern borderline. Letting the light cavalry make full use of their mobility to launch a sneak attack on the two flanks of the streamer's army is a good command, but they exposed their own army to the heavy cavalry's attack. To be honest, this is not the way to die. Lo Siji Lianmeng, I remember that the warhorses that the host chose for the heavy cavalry camp are all heavy horses. They weigh between 700 to 1,200 kilograms and are taller than adult men. A warhorse weighed at least 700 kilograms, and an adult man weighed at least 70 kilograms. The armor, weapons, and miscellaneous items on his body weighed 30 kilograms. Think about it. More than 3,000 items weighing as much as 800 kilograms collided head-on. They didn't just move one or two, but more than 3,000 of them charged together. The northern borderline only cared about the small number of Jiang Pengji's cavalry and that they couldn't do anything. They forgot the terrifying destructive power of the heavy cavalry. The cavalry of the northern borderline attacked one step slower than the enemy, but they took the initiative to fight with the two flanks of Jiang Pengji's army. The left wing of the army was led by Li Yun. He had been waiting there for a long time. The soldiers of the horse-chopping battalion were already in a battle formation. The spears that were specially prepared for the cavalry of the northern borderline had also been prepared. They were set up in rows. The spears were 2 feet in diameter, with cross-shaped holes. They were checked vertically and horizontally. They were long and sharp at the end. Men and horses couldn't gallop. This was a barrier used to stop the cavalry of the northern borderline from charging. The soldiers could also use it to form a horse formation to greatly limit the cavalry's charge. Raise your shields. First row. Stab. First row, retreat. Second row, follow up. Li Yun shouted. Immediately, specialized soldiers raised the correct battle flag and gave the command. The cavalry of the northern borderline had a large number of people. Their reflexes were extremely fast. When the first batch of soldiers were pierced by the spears, the cavalry behind immediately circled around and attacked in a roundabout way. Li Yun commanded the soldiers to move the spears, exhausting the elite troops of the northern borderline as much as possible. When the line of defense was broken, the soldiers of the horse-chopping battalion put up their shields and formed a formation to resist the cavalry's charge. The soldiers behind then stabbed the enemy with their spears. The cavalry of the northern borderline could not break the left wing's defense line in a short time. Instead, they suffered heavy losses. Damn it. Did this look like a weak defense? In contrast, the battlefield on the right wing was different. The cavalry of the northern borderline acted as if there was no one there. They killed each other. However, as they killed and killed, the 8th Prince, who was commanding the battlefield on the right wing, realized that something was wrong. Why were the enemies they were fighting with all the deep-faced barbarians of the northern borderline? He immediately thought of the tribes that had pretended to surrender to Jiang Pengji. He was shocked. However, there was no time for him to think in a place like the battlefield. The cavalry of the northern borderline reacted too quickly. When the 8th Prince realized that something was wrong, the troops of the northern borderline who had pretended to surrender to the right wing's front line were mostly dead. She deliberately relaxed the right wing's defense line. Wasn't it to let the northern borderline shoot themselves in the foot? Scheming against her? When she, Jiang Pengji, dominated the interstellar battlefield, the fathers of these young boys were still little tadpoles. All troops, listen to my command. When Jiang Pengji saw that it was about time, the real bugle horn sounded. In an instant, it aroused the soldiers' fighting spirit. At the same time, more than 3,000 heavy cavalry had already rushed into the army of the northern borderline. To make a vivid analogy, the heavy cavalry were bandits who entered the village. The northern borderline were the little girls in the village. Each of them was naked, without a single piece of clothing, and they looked shy. Although this analogy was a little inappropriate, for the northern borderline, they had indeed suffered inhumane ravages. It was difficult for 1 or 2 heavy cavalry to cause large-scale destruction, but what about 3,000 people moving together? They trampled violently and cruelly ravaged along the way. Like a huge chopper, they easily stabbed into the fat and tender pork and tore a big hole in an instant. Regarding the heavy cavalry battalion that Jiang Pengji had invested a lot of money to build, the generals were perturbed and the strategists frowned. Before this, there were heavy cavalry, but the scale was very small. It was difficult for them to achieve great things. Firstly, there were technical limitations. The iron-making technology was not mature. Secondly, there were financial limitations. The cost of making armor was too high. In the eyes of the strategists and the generals, the heavy cavalry were not soldiers. They were a moving mountain of gold and silver. They had no idea how powerful the heavy cavalry was. Seeing the destructive power of the heavy cavalry from afar, Fengzhen directly inhaled a breath of cold air and said, golden words. Chapter 1009. Fengzhen couldn't help but let his imagination run wild. If they had 30,000 well-trained heavy cavalry, it wouldn't be a dream to defeat the northern borderline. Just the 3,000 heavy cavalry is already so powerful. If it's 30,000, won't we be invincible? No matter how smart a strategist was, he couldn't handle enough hooves. They would be beaten by force and crushed by strength. Sun Wen didn't understand the inside story of the formation of the heavy cavalry, but just the cost alone was enough to make him speechless. Although the Lord always wore no makeup and wore an "I'm very poor" look, her real wealth was frighteningly rich. Thinking of the 3 residences Jiang Pengji had given him, Sun Wen finally understood how rich Jiang Pengji was. Without money, which lord could build 3,000 heavy cavalry and still give him 3 residences? There was one in Xiangyang district of Wanzhou, one in Shangyang County, and one in Chongzhou. The land and house deeds were still hot. Although he only looked at the one in Chongzhou, judging from the appearance of the houses, the other 2 residences were not bad. The 3 residences plus the gold, silver, and jewelry Sun Wen extorted from the northern borderline were enough to feed his grandson Lan Lan for the rest of his life. 30,000? Qiguan Rang laughed. Just the 3,000 is enough to make the Lord's heart ache. Build 30,000 heavy cavalry? That would depend on the storage of the northern borderline's nobles. Wei Ci smiled. It's not impossible. If a few more idiots from the northern borderline come, it'll be done. Sun Wen joined very late. He didn't know where Jiang Pengji's venture fund came from. He thought it was from Lu Shi. However, according to Sun Wen's understanding of Jiang Pengji, the possibility was very small. Hearing Wei Ci say that, he vaguely felt that something was wrong. What does the Lord's expansion of the heavy cavalry have to do with the northern borderline? Qiguan Rang waved his fan to disperse the heat around him. I don't know. The Lord's private storage can reach its current scale because 99% of it was given by the northern borderline. The armor, warhorses, and weapons used by the heavy cavalry were all made with the silver sent from the northern borderline. Isn't it another way of the crow feeding the sheep? It was taken from the people and used for the people. There was nothing wrong with that. Sun Wen was dumbfounded. He had lived for more than 40 years, or about 50 years, and this was the first time he had learned the meaning of the crow feeding, the lamb kneeling on its breast. Sun Wen, he felt that he should say something so that he wouldn't stand out among them. What's there to say? His curiosity was piqued. Wei Ci, who was at the side, briefly explained about the colored glass of the heavenly palace. The more Sun Wen listened, the more solemn his expression became. Sun Wen knew about the colored glass of the heavenly palace. After all, that thing had wreaked havoc in Zhongzhou. However, he didn't suspect that Jiang Pengji was plotting against Zhongzhou. Instead, he felt that Zhongzhou had stolen their technology. Firstly, Jiang Pengji didn't have much territory at that time. The Red Lotus group hadn't been dealt with yet. How could she extend her hand to Zhongzhou? Secondly, Jiang Pengji used the colored glass of the heavenly palace to calculate the wealth of the northern borderline. As a result, a large amount of colored glass of the heavenly palace was released in Zhongzhou, which destroyed the supply and demand market. Jiang Pengji's business could not continue. She could only extort a sum of money from the northern borderline in a hurry before stopping. Her losses were huge, the few of them spoke in low voices. The situation on the battlefield changed rapidly. Shouts of killing shook the heavens and quickly drowned out their voices. The left wing led by Li Yun was as firm as a rock. Fu Wang oversaw the center army and commanded calmly. The right wing led by Jiang Pengji switched from defense to offense. Jiang Nongqin supported them according to the situation. The cavalry of the northern borderline tried to use their speed as fast as the wind to tire the enemy out. They never expected that the enemy's quality on the battlefield was so high that it was frightening. Even if their eyes were red from killing, once the command of the army's battle flag was given, they would choose to give up on attacking and listen to orders. The cavalry of the northern borderline wanted to bypass the front and launch a sneak attack. The enemy's formation immediately turned to defense. While it was watertight, it didn't lack a strong offensive ability. Both sides were fighting non-stop. Jiang Pengji, the lord, didn't stay idle either. Lang Jun, Jiang Nongqin rushed over with her troops. She didn't dare to call out to her lord. She was afraid that she would expose Jiang Pengji's identity and provoke the cavalry of the northern borderline to counterattack. If they were determined to drag the lord to death, it would be terrible. Nongqin. Jiang Pengji called out. The long sword in her hand was completely bent. It was on the verge of being scrapped. Such a sword would affect her efficiency in killing people. Jiang Nongqin understood. She removed the extra weapons from the back of her horse and charged toward where Jiang Pengji was. "You're in command here." Jiang Pengji became more and more brutal when she received new equipment. Jiang Nongqin endured it. In the end, she swallowed her unspoken words. She might be cold to others, but when it came to her lord, she would never be able to say a word of rejection. Jiang Pengji threw the task of commanding the right wing to Jiang Nongqin. It seemed willful and casual, but in fact, she wanted to give her more opportunities to train. Jiang Nongqin managed the women's battalion very well. It was because she did it so well that she spent most of her time training the women's battalion. Most of the battlefield tasks were to provide support, escort rations, clean up the battlefield, and treat the wounded and sick. This was not beneficial to Jiang Nongqin's development. The military camp was a place with strict discipline and a strict hierarchy. Although they were both captains, having military power and not having military power were two different concepts. Jiang Nongqin was the captain of the women's battalion. Her actual military power was second only to Fu Wang. However, her experience in commanding battles was not even as good as Jian Yin and Luo Yu. She immersed herself in her work and did not complain. However, as the lord, Jiang Pengji could not watch such a good seedling go to waste. The women's battalion was also a knife in Jiang Pengji's hands. Such a knife could not only be used for logistics and trivial matters. "Hey, look what I found." Two different big fish. Jiang Pengji's sharp eyes saw two different figures. Her eyes lit up. Most of the cavalrymen of the northern borderline wore cloth clothes and rattan armor. Their equipment was simple and crude. In Jiang Pengji's eyes, they were just a group of weak girls who had no strength to truss a chicken. One knife for one, and a backhand stab for a double kill. Among such a group of girls, who were dressed in shabby clothes, there were two beautiful women who were dressed in gorgeous palace clothes. Wasn't it eye-catching? In the army, the higher one's status and military power were, the better and more complete the equipment they wore. Needless to say, the two beautiful women in palace clothes were definitely the higher-ups of the northern borderline military. One was dressed in a crimson military uniform, and the other was dressed in an orange-yellow military uniform. She could not pretend not to see such bright colors. She licked her lips. The strong smell of blood stimulated her taste buds, making her feel energized. Seeing that the right flank could not be conquered after a long time and that the army of the northern borderline was howling in pain from the charge of the 3,000 heavy cavalry, the usually calm 8th prince could not hold it in anymore. "Eighth brother, the traitor Lu is indeed treacherous. Most of the people who were defeated by us just now faked their surrender." The 7th prince was dressed in an orange-yellow military uniform. He looked quite interesting. The 8th prince's face darkened. A hint of gloom flashed across his fair cheeks. Chapter 10:10. After thinking about this, the 8th prince's heart sank. If Jiang Pengji had seen through the trick of pretending to surrender, then there must be something wrong with the military information that the messenger secretly passed to them. They received news that Liu Bei's flanks were weak, and the main force was concentrated in the front. What was the result? They charged several times and lost many cavalries, but they still couldn't break through the enemy's defense line. Looking at the elite troops led by Jiang Pengji, the 8th prince felt powerless. 3 months of hard training would make them elites. Liu Bei's troops had more than 3 months of training. They were truly obedient. As long as the command flag changed, they could change from offense to defense. Whether it was support or something else, their efficiency was frightening. Even if thousands of cavalries from the northern borderline charged together, the soldiers with heavy shields did not even retreat. They looked like they were going to fight with their bodies. At this moment, the 8th prince had a hopeless idea in his mind. How unlucky was the northern borderline to be targeted by these elites? For a moment, countless thoughts flashed through the 8th prince's mind. Before he could come back to his senses, he heard the 7th prince's surprised voice. 8th brother, be careful. The 8th prince subconsciously turned his head. An arrow passed through the heads of 2 cavalries from the northern borderline and finally fell to the ground. Seeing this, the 8th prince was so shocked that he broke out in a cold sweat. The 8th prince called out, 7th brother. At that moment, he saw the 7th prince's shoulder being pierced by an arrow. Blood immediately spurted out. He reached out and held the 7th prince who had fallen from the horse. The prince's face was pale and his forehead was sweating from the pain. The 7th prince was considered the lowest among the princes in riding and archery. He did not like to play with swords and spears. When had he ever been so seriously injured? 8th brother, if you can't do it, leave me alone. The 7th prince's lips were pale and he was bleeding. He endured the pain and persuaded the 8th prince. The 2 arrows were clearly aimed at us brothers. The 8th prince quickly recalled the thrilling process just now. As the 7th prince said, the 2 arrows were aimed at them. What nonsense are you talking about? If I leave you behind, am I still human? Although the 9 princes of the northern borderline heard each other, the 7th prince had always taken care of the 8th prince. The 8th prince was not a heartless person. How could he leave his brother behind at this time? It was at this time that a disturbance came from 1,000 feet away. Shouts of killing soared to the heavens. Taking a closer look, he saw that the leading general's eyes were red from killing. He led his men and tore a path out, killing the northern frontier cavalry. The 8th prince took a look and was very sure who had shot the 2 arrows just now. Do you really think there's no one in the northern borderline? The invincible cavalry had stumbled here, unable to break through the enemy's line of defense, which made the 8th prince extremely embarrassed. He reorganized the remaining soldiers around him and planned to compete with Jiang Pengji. No matter how valiant a general was, he was still a human, not a god. As long as one was human, there would come a time when one would run out of energy. Don't look at how this little general had defeated 3 people in a row, but his stamina was probably almost depleted. He could kill a dozen cavalrymen by himself, but he could charge all the way to him and kill more than 100 cavalrymen. The 8th prince steadied his mind. However, he soon miscalculated. Not only did Jiang Pengji not show any signs of exhaustion, but she became more and more courageous as she fought. One slash to kill a little kid. He had already surpassed God. When the distance between them was less than 500 feet, the 8th prince completely panicked. 500 feet was not far, but it was not close either. The 8th prince was sure that the other party was looking at him and smiling at him with blood-stained eyes. Good boys, follow me and kill them. Capture these 2 soft and tender people alive. Jiang Pengji killed the cavalrymen who were surging forward and cut off their long spears. Her attitude was unruly and arrogant. Kill them. Most of the audience was attracted by the fierce fighting on the battlefield. A few of them noticed Jiang Pengji's side. Following Jiang Pengji's valiant posture, which was as if she was cutting melons and vegetables, Her fangirls were frantically calling her. Schwangi, I'm cheering for the streamer. She's so handsome that she's straightened up, as straight as a mosquito coil. Shufacey K, pft, the streamer is totally acting like a gangster. What do you mean by, capture these two soft and tender people alive, ? Yabao Qingshi, sob, I'm more tender than them. When are you going to capture me? Kuba Bajeti, ever since I watched my Pungpung's live stream, I feel like I'm more aggressive than my boyfriend. I attack him until his legs turn to jelly. If she didn't attack, how could she be called aggressive? Seeing that the two prey were about to escape, Jiang Pengji immediately gave orders to Little White. No prey that I've set my eyes on can escape. It was not easy for the 8th prince to evacuate with his men. The surroundings were in chaos. The cavalrymen were caught in a chaotic battle. Not only could they not give full play to their advantage in speed, but it was also easy to cause crowding and trampling. Jiang Pengji led her men and killed all the way. It was like a sharp blade stabbing into the enemy's flesh. She pulled the blade horizontally and tore a huge hole. The 8th prince panicked and called for his guards to help him and the 7th prince escape, but how could his guards be a match for Jiang Pengji? At this moment, a noose fell from the sky and caught him. Before the 8th prince could react, the rope suddenly tightened, and a majestic force came from behind him, pulling him backward and forcing him to fall from the horse's back, causing him to tumble. That was not the end. He was dragged along by the rope, and there were horse hooves all around him. The 8th prince's right leg was trampled by a horse's hoof. The bone in his leg made a bone-cracking sound, and he fainted from the pain. Before the 8th prince was trampled to death, Jiang Pengji pulled him up and threw him onto the back of another masterless warhorse, as if throwing something away. 8th brother, everything happened too suddenly. When the 7th prince reacted, the 8th prince had already been dragged to the ground by Jiang Pengji's rope. His eyes were bloodshot with hatred. The 7th prince used his intact arm to pull out the big sword at his waist and rode toward Jiang Pengji. A hero saving the damsel in distress? If you want to save someone, look at who your grandfather is. Jiang Pengji did not take him seriously at all. She just stabbed his lower abdomen with the handle of the sword. Although it was not fatal, the 7th prince had the illusion that he had been trampled by a horse's hoof. Jiang Pengji used the extra rope to tie the 7th prince's neck. Very good. Captive +1. Look at the armor on your bodies. It's pretty good. Your status in the northern borderline should not be low, right? Jiang Pengji, who had killed until her face was covered in blood, finally had the time to care about her captive. The 7th prince was still somewhat conscious. Blood was flowing from the corner of his mouth, and his eyes were full of monstrous hatred. What do you hate? Jiang Pengji sneered. You barbarians of the northern borderline massacred the 3 cities of Shangyu, bullied the people at the border, kidnapped and killed innocent women and children, tied them up like livestock, and put them on the backs of horses as trophies of war. When did you ever think that this day would come? They killed their husbands' wives and daughters in front of their corpses, and bullied their parents' children in front of their corpses. When did the northern borderline ever think that this day would come? Jiang Pengji would not use such a despicable method to humiliate them, because whoever did such a thing, no matter who it was a beast. Chapter 10-11. Today, I'll teach you one thing: the winner is king, and the loser is a bandit. Jiang Pengji curled her horsewhip in her hand and pressed it against his face, leaving a red mark. The 7th prince pursed his lips and spat a mouthful of blood at Jiang Pengji, but she was already aware of it, so he did not spit on her. He breathed heavily and said, "Cut the crap. You said it yourself, the winner is king, and the loser is a bandit. Those people, they deserve to die. Not to mention the 3 tribes of the northern borderline, even people like you who claim to be benevolent and righteous. When have you ever treated captives kindly? Don't flatter yourself. In this era of cold weapons, captives could not be called people at all, and they did not deserve to be treated like humans. At best, they were just spoils of war. The winner had the right to deal with his spoils of war. This was an unchanging rule. The seventh prince would not repent or feel ashamed. Because the northern borderline won, they had the right to deal with the people of the 3 cities of Shangyu. The men were killed to satisfy their bloodthirsty and violent urges. The women were raped to satisfy their inner desires with their bodies and cries. This was the right of the winner. How could the loser have the face to fight for rights and treatment for himself? Jiang Pengji did not get angry. Instead, she laughed and asked, according to your logic, is it justified for me to slaughter all the barbarians of the northern borderline? Although it was a question, Jiang Pengji used a very firm tone of statement. Every word was filled with frightening murderous intent. The seventh prince's body trembled, and his pale face turned livid. You're not Lu the traitor. Do your words count? Don't be fooled by the seventh prince's righteous words, he was also a standard double standard. When the northern borderline won, they could wantonly slaughter, plunder, and humiliate the enemy. But when they were defeated by the enemy, they could not stand the enemy treating them like that. Jiang Pengji said, of course, I mean what I said. The seventh prince was startled. A terrible thought entered his mind, and his increasingly muddled consciousness instantly came back. You are, at that moment, the seventh prince had the illusion of being speechless. If he remembered correctly, the young general in front of him had killed 3 generals of the northern borderline in a row. No, how could she be Lu the traitor? Lu Shi? The seventh prince cried out involuntarily, panting heavily on the horse's back. How could you be Lu Shi? Jiang Pengji lifted her hand and used her little finger to pick her ear. She clicked her tongue. Why are you so surprised? Haven't you seen our lord fight in person? The seventh prince was rendered speechless by her words, and his heart was filled with regret. If they had known that she was Lu Shi, they would have used all sorts of methods to kill her. The seventh prince had forgotten that their acting king had given the order to let off the arrows. What was the result? In the end, not a single hair on Jiang Pengji's body was harmed. How shameful. The seventh prince was drenched in cold sweat as he recalled the conversation between the 2 of them just now. The shouts of killing around him shook the heavens, giving him great psychological pressure. The Han clan of the Central Plains believes in Confucianism and boasts of being benevolent. Do you really dare to risk universal condemnation and slaughter the entire northern borderline? The seventh prince stared at Jiang Pengji. He was the meat on the chopping block. The scale of the battlefield was tilted towards Jiang Pengji's side. Nearly half of the northern borderline's territory had fallen into her hands. The seventh prince really could not be stubborn anymore. Hearing him say that, Jiang Pengji smiled. I finally understand the saying that morality can restrain a gentleman, but it can't restrain a villain. You can unscrupulously slaughter innocent people in Shangyu, but we can't. Do we have to treat you well? Jiang Pengji raised her hand and pinched the seventh prince's chin. With a little force, he felt that Jiang Pengji's hand was like a pair of iron pincers, almost crushing his jaw. TSK, your face is really big. The seventh prince was in so much pain that tears came out of his eyes. His wound split open and more fresh, viscous blood gushed out. Jiang Pengji smiled. Don't worry, I won't slaughter everyone in the northern borderline. But from now on, I will make the northern borderline history. Her eyes glinted coldly. The seventh prince's heart skipped a beat, and he had a vague bad feeling. What do you mean? The seventh prince's breathing was rapid, and his pale cheeks were dyed with an abnormal flush. When the people of the northern borderline don't speak the barbarian language, don't know the barbarian language, and even forget where their ancestors came from, this should be considered the extinction of their clan, right? Jiang Pengji smiled like a flower, but in the eyes of the seventh prince, she was as fierce as a Rakshasa. Unfortunately, you won't be able to see it. The seventh prince was so angry that blood rushed to his brain and he fainted. Jiang Pengji sneered in disdain. She lifted her machete and leaped onto Little White's back. She pulled the reins. Little White, let's go. More than 10,000 cavalrymen from the northern borderline were pinned down by Jiang Pengji's army on the left and right, unable to return to defend. On the other hand, the elites of the main force were thrown into disarray by the 3,000 heavy cavalry. The soldiers howled in pain, and the formation of the army was in a mess. When Fu Wang saw this, he decisively ordered the entire army to attack. The elites of the middle army followed behind the heavy cavalry and charged towards the enemy's main force, harvesting the enemy's heads. Kill them. Who told you to hide behind them? The situation changed in the blink of an eye. The sixth prince was so angry that his eyes were bloodshot. The cavalry of the northern borderline had always been successful. How could they fail? The enemy only had 3,000 heavy cavalry. How could they force back their army of more than 100,000? The sixth prince could not accept such a failure, but reality gave him a hard slap in the face. The cavalry of the northern borderline was not always successful. They had kicked an iron plate. Whoever dares to take a step back will be killed without mercy. The sixth prince drew his sword and killed a few soldiers who were fleeing backward in an attempt to stabilize the army's morale. However, it was all too late. The 3,000 heavy cavalry charged forward in a crushing manner as soon as they arrived. They killed the people of the northern borderline and caused a great deal of psychological pressure. Before the heavy cavalry was exhausted, Fu Wang led the army to rush over. Not only did he support the exhausted heavy cavalry, but he also took over the baton from them. He further suppressed the fighting spirit of the northern borderline and completely destroyed their courage. The morale of the army of the northern borderline was already low. It was even more impossible for them to fight now. Acting king, retreat, the general of the northern borderline protected the sixth prince. His resolute face revealed a rare vulnerability, and his eyes were bloodshot. If we retreat now, we still have a chance. The fighting spirit of the northern borderline had been exhausted. If they did not retreat, their losses would only increase. At such a time, the main general should retreat decisively to prevent losses. The sixth prince gritted his teeth unwillingly. If they retreated now, wouldn't that traitor Lu take advantage of the victory to pursue them? Retreat, retreat into the royal city. If we don't retreat now, it will be too late. At this moment, the first prince, dressed in armor and covered in blood, rushed over on horseback. His eyes were filled with fatigue. The sixth prince clenched his fists angrily and squeezed out a word, retreat. What could he do even if he was unwilling? He did not want to lose his life here. The third prince followed closely behind the first prince. After the fierce battle just now, he had several wounds on his body and was covered in blood. Retreat now? The first prince roared, third prince, if we don't retreat now, we won't have a chance to leave. The third prince's eyes widened. His brown pupils were filled with sorrow as if he was about to cry. Chapter 10-12. After several battles, most of the northern borderline cavalry had been lost. If they withdrew their main force, what would happen to the cavalry still fighting on the front line? Abandon them? The northern borderline could not afford this loss. The third prince knew very well that if they gave up the cavalry now, they would only be struggling at death's door. You still have time to care about that? The first prince was so angry that he almost fainted. Do you want to die if you don't withdraw now? The third prince shuddered, seemingly stunned by the first prince's words. After a while, he said dryly, without the cavalry, how can we stop Luluo? Hide in King's City? Their King's City was probably no different from a piece of paper in the eyes of the enemy, right? The people of the Central Plains made a living by farming. Their living environment was relatively fixed, so they would build high cities and thick walls to block outside attacks. The three tribes of the northern borderline were nomadic and liked to live by the water. They had no fixed residence and were very mobile, so their houses were all tents that were easy to dismantle and move. Under such circumstances, the city walls were not very useful to them, so there were very few cities in the northern borderline. The so-called King's City was built to show the uniqueness of the northern borderline's imperial court. It was specially built to imitate the capital of the Central Plains. To put it bluntly, it was just a shoddy construction. The third prince wept in his heart and complained, Luluo has fought many sieges. Can a mere king's city really stop them? No matter what, they could not give up on the cavalry at the front. Slap! A loud slap sounded, and a palm print appeared on the third prince's face. After a few breaths, half of his face swelled up. Boost the morale of others and diminish our own. Are you a spy sent by Luluo? If you want to die, I can grant you death. The sixth prince retracted his hand and said sinisterly, I am the acting king. I have the final say in everything. Now, withdraw. The third prince looked at his brother in disbelief, his eyes full of shock and disappointment. The sixth prince gave the order to withdraw. Not long after, there was a knock on the door. They advanced at the sound of drums and retreated at the sound of metal. Fu Wang heard the movement and revealed a somewhat blood-stained smile. You want to withdraw now? It's too late. After saying that, he ordered the left and right wings to change their movements and send another 20,000 soldiers from the middle army to cut off the northern borderline cavalry's retreat. The rest of the troops followed him to chase after the remnants of the northern borderline. They chased and fought along the way, eating up the enemy soldiers that were left behind bit by bit, chasing them all the way to the foot of the city. The bloody battle lasted until sunset before it gradually stopped. The orange-red setting sun shone on the earth, dyeing it with a desolate color. Monarch City stood on the horizon, but the city walls could not bring the slightest sense of security to the northern kingdom. The north borderline suffered heavy losses, while Jiangpengji returned victorious. That was fun. Today's killing was really fun. Fu Wang's armor was drenched in blood, and the joints of his armor were stained with bits of flesh. He looked like a ferocious ghost that had crawled out of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. The most eye-catching thing was that he was holding two helmeted heads in his hands. No one felt that he had done a bad job at such a rude behavior. Instead, they were curious about the owner of the two heads. However, there was always an exception. Jiang Nongqin secretly frowned. General Fu, are you bringing these two heads here to offer them to my lord as a side dish? When they got slightly closer to Fu Wang, the soaring smell of blood almost suffocated them. Fu Wang's ability to command the three armies and kill two of the enemy's generals was not to be underestimated. The smile on Fu Wang's face froze for a moment. Seeing that the person who spoke was Jiang Nongqin, he could not retort. There were no women in the military camp. No one could be underestimated. Fu Wang did not have much contact with Jiang Nongqin, but he knew that she was not to be trifled with. Not to mention anything else, the female camp was in charge of the entire casualty camp. Perhaps one day, his life would be on the line and he could count on her to save him. Officer Jiang, what kind of person is the Lord? How could she eat raw meat and drink blood like the barbarians? Jiang Nongqin said coldly, if that's the case, the general should find a box to put it in, so as not to disturb the Lord. Fu Wang was speechless. Li Yun heard the conversation between the two. Seeing that Jiang Nongqin had left, he said, she cares a lot about the Lord. General, don't take it to heart. Fu Wang glanced at Li Yun with a hidden bitterness in his eyes, making him feel baffled. I understand. Is the Lord the most important? It was just a few words, but the sourness was enough to make a person fall down. Fu Wang was not angry at Jiang Nongqin, he was just touched by the scene. Huijuan's letters were always addressed to the Lord. Most of them were to report that she was safe or to send her regards. Occasionally, she would also share the growth of the twins. Fu Wang even saw that there were two children's ink footprints on the letters. She would only mention his name in 3 to 5 letters. He was jealous and envious. He did not dare to hate. Huijun was like this, Jiang Nongqin was the same, and the other female soldiers in the female camp also worshipped the Lord like a god. Tisk, it's useless to like her. Just give up, the Lord is a woman. Fu Wang muttered softly. He ordered someone to prepare 2 boxes for him to place the enemy generals' heads. To the general, the enemy generals' heads were not just heads, but also meritorious deeds and glory. The value of these 2 heads could at least be exchanged for a lifetime of rouge and cosmetics for the precious daughter of Huijuan's family. Beheading the general's head was nothing. The biggest gain from this battle was the annihilation of the remaining cavalry of the north borderline and the capture of a large number of warhorses. The undamaged warhorses were kept as spoils of war, the seriously injured and disabled ones were kept as reserve rations, and the enemy's warhorses that had died in battle were used as food. To be honest, the living conditions of the generals and soldiers were extremely difficult. They had attacked the north borderline for more than half a year, and they could hardly eat meat. Fighting a war was tiring, but the heavy work of dealing with the aftermath was even more tiring. For example, when cleaning up the battlefield, the arrows that were lost had to be retrieved. Most of the swords, spears, swords, and halberds that were lost on the battlefield could be recycled and reused. The clothes and armor on the enemy's corpses could also be reused by sewing and mending them. There were also the heavy goods that the enemy camp did not have time to take away. In addition to these tasks, rescuing the wounded soldiers was an even more urgent matter. Half of the soldiers did not die on the battlefield, but because they did not receive timely treatment after the battle. Jiang Pengji turned off the streaming room and planned to take a bath in the main tent to clean up the blood on her body. Everyone was too busy. Clean hot water was needed for the wounded soldiers, so Jiang Pengji did not bother others. She directly exchanged a large basin of water from the system store and washed up. When she jumped into the bathtub wearing the innermost inner garment, the basin that was originally so clear that the bottom could be seen was instantly dyed red. After changing a few basins of water in a row, she was barely able to wash herself clean. Although the smell of blood still lingered around her body that could not be dispelled, it was much better than before. "My lord, Wei Xiai requests to see you." Jiang Pengji said, "Zixiao, come in." The curtain of the tent was lifted, and Wei Xiai came in carrying a heavy food box. He walked around the simple screen and saw Jiang Pengji in a pine green gown. The belt was loosely tied, and her long wet black hair was casually draped over her shoulders. Her face had a natural blush that was unique after a bath. Her dark eyes were bright and full of spirit. No one dared to look at her directly for fear of profaning her. Chapter 10:13. Wei Xiai understood her. Once she was busy, she would not treat herself as a human. She would not eat unless someone reminded her. He could do whatever he wanted when he was young, but when he got older, his spleen and stomach would suffer. Reminded by him, Jiang Pengji raised her hand to rub her stomach. She had not eaten for a few meals and was so hungry that she could not feel it. If Zixiao didn't mention it, I would have forgotten about it. Wei Xiai could not help but laugh. He pulled the food table over and opened the food box. A rich aroma assailed his nostrils. The conditions of the barracks were poor, and there were few fruits and vegetables in the north. The soldiers either ate dried rations or marinated jerky, which tasted terrible. There were quite a lot of spoils of war today. Wei Xiai asked the cooks to leave him a few pieces of good meat with an appropriate amount of fat and lean meat, as well as some mountain-dried goods that he had plundered. Jiang Pengji watched as Wei Xiai took out the food from the food box. Smelling the aroma of the food, her stomach started to rumble. The chef doesn't have such good skills. Could it be that Zixiao specially made it for me? The chef only knew how to cook in large pots of rice and dishes. He could only ensure that the food was clean and did not care about the taste. Sometimes, the food was half-cooked, and the soldiers could only bite the bullet and eat it. The food that Wei Xiai brought out was different. Disregarding the taste, just looking at the color and smelling the aroma was enough to make one's thumb twitch. Other than the Lord, I have never cooked for anyone else. Eat it while it's hot. Wei Xiai filled her bowl with rice and fetched a pair of bamboo chopsticks. I haven't cooked for a long time. I don't know if my skills have gotten rusty. If you don't like it, I'll get someone to prepare another serving. Jiang Pengji took the bowl and chopsticks. She looked up at Wei Si as she ate the rice. Why is my lord looking at Si like that? Wei Si scooped a bowl of mushroom soup for her to eat. It's not good to always eat meat, it's easy to get sick of it. Jiang Pengji smiled and said, a feast for the eyes. I can only eat when I look at Zixiao. Wei Si could not stop smiling bitterly. Even though the knot in his heart had been resolved, his lord's seductive methods always caught him off guard. I didn't expect that I would be of such use, Wei Si continued readily. In that case, my lord, please eat a few more bowls. Although that was what he said, in his heart, he thought, what a glib tongue. If his face was so good at eating, why didn't His Majesty eat on time in the past? Why did he have to coax His Majesty with good words? Now that he recalled it, Wei Si came up with an absurd conjecture. Could it be that Her Majesty didn't have a bad appetite and just wanted him to coax her? If Zixiao eats with me, I can eat with more relish. Si has already eaten. Wei Si smiled and refilled her bowl. His gaze was as gentle as water. Jiang Pengji finished the food prepared by Wei Si without wasting a grain of rice or a drop of soup. Her plate was brighter than her face. With Zixiao's craftsmanship, he should be able to get married. Wei Si said, no hurry, there are still a few more years. Jiang Pengji looked at Wei Si's lips and subconsciously licked her dry lips. Zixiao, did you prepare dessert? Wei Si was stunned. Although his lord was not a picky eater, she did not like food that was overly sweet and rarely touched desserts. Not yet. Without waiting for him to finish speaking, he saw her right hand move as fast as lightning and press the back of his neck to her. The two of them directly fell onto the table. Although Jiang Pengji had a lot of theoretical knowledge, when it came to real combat, she seemed to only know how to gnaw. After a while, Wei Si left the main tent with the empty food box. His originally pale lips were as red as fire, as if they could drip blood. When he met Qiguanrang, he bowed his head slightly and hurriedly greeted him. Qiguanrang was speechless. Qiguanrang happened to have something to discuss with Jiang Pengji. Seeing his lord's expression and thinking of Wei Si's embarrassed look, he could not help but laugh. Wei Si was 26 years old, and his lord was almost 20. At this age, if they moved a little faster, their children could go to the Golden Scale Academy. Yet, the two of them were extremely naive. My lord, I've found out the identities of those two people. Qiguanrang gathered his thoughts and resumed his official state. Their identities? Jiang Pengji was stunned for a moment, then immediately remembered who Qiguanrang was referring to. What identities? Jiang Pengji had captured the two people alive. Just by looking at their armors, she could tell that they were of extraordinary status. Perhaps they were important figures in the northern borderline. She could not be bothered to waste time and directly left the matter to Qiguanrang to handle. She hurriedly returned to the tent to wash up and change her clothes. The two of them were stubborn and kept their identities a secret. I couldn't get anything out of them through interrogation. However, Zai Dao has seen them and knows their identities. When Qiguanrang said this, the smile on his face grew wider. Both of them are princes of the northern borderline. One is the 7th and the other is the 8th. The princes of the northern borderline? Jiang Pengji was shocked and said in astonishment, the king of the northern borderline, that old tortoise, is quite fertile. His fertility was quite strong. Jiang Pengji killed the 2nd prince as a sacrifice to the flag and also slaughtered the 9th prince. She left his corpse hanging to deal a blow to the morale of the northern borderline. Sun Wen killed with a borrowed knife and used the 9th prince to kill the 4th prince of the northern borderline. In this way, she had killed 3 princes of the northern borderline and now captured 2 more. There were too many princes of the northern borderline. They were not valuable at all. Qiguanrang was choked by his lord's description. However, the king of the northern borderline was indeed fertile. His lord was his nemesis. She was destined to end the royal family's bloodline. How does my lord intend to deal with the two of them? Jiang Pengji thought about it. We're a family. We pay particular attention to reunion. Send them down to meet their other brothers. Qiguan Rang frowned. His lord's words meant that she did not intend to let the two of them go. Kill them now? If we kill them now, won't it be too easy for the northern borderline? Jiang Pengji thought about it and came up with an idea. She said, strip them naked, tie them up, and hang them on the arrow tower. I remember that the second prince of the northern borderline was also treated like this. They are all brothers. We can't be biased. She then added, by the way, before we do this, Wenjing, draft a letter and tell the royal court of the northern borderline that if they want to exchange for the two of them, they only need to tie up the royal family and surrender. If they are unwilling, then they can open their eyes and watch. If it was any other time, she could use the captives to exchange for benefits, but Jiang Pengji did not intend to let the northern borderline go. Instead of releasing them, it was better to use them to attack the morale of the northern borderline and give them mental pressure. Qiguan Rang said, yes. In another place, the eighth prince, who had been reduced to a prisoner, finally woke up. Seeing that the eighth prince was showing signs of waking up, the seventh prince hurriedly called out, eighth brother, wake up. The eighth prince slowly woke up. He only felt that his throat was dry, as if there was a fire burning there. Seventh brother, where is this? The eighth prince moved his body and found that his hands were tightly tied with ropes. A sharp pain came from his lower limbs. In an instant, the memories from before he fainted swarmed in. Chapter 10:14. Seventh prince said sadly, we were captured by that traitor Lu, and now we're his prisoners. His injuries were serious. The arrow wound on his shoulder was filthy. If it wasn't taken care of, it might even rot. Eighth prince's heart skipped a beat. He couldn't believe this reality. We were captured. He wasn't a naive person. If he fell into the enemy's hands, he could imagine what would happen to him. Seventh prince nodded heavily. Yes. If that's the case. Eighth prince hurriedly asked, is there any movement from the imperial court? He and seventh prince were both princes of the imperial court. They represented the face and dignity of the imperial court. If they were humiliated, the imperial court would lose face as well. The imperial court wouldn't allow the enemy to humiliate them. They would definitely send someone to negotiate with that traitor Lu and negotiate terms for the two of them. The seventh prince knew what the eighth prince was thinking. After a while, he shook his head slowly and rejected the eighth prince's hopes. He said sadly, Lu Buwei has no intention of seeing us. The imperial court is controlled by the sixth prince. He can't wait for us to die. Why would he send someone to redeem us? Seventh prince had been supporting eighth prince for free. Eighth prince was a strong contender to replace the king. The two of them were sixth prince's biggest problem. Why would he give up his interests in exchange for them? Little did he know that the imperial court was in an uproar. Sixth prince hadn't slept for 2 days. He was afraid that if he closed his eyes, the enemy would break into the imperial court. He hadn't slept for a long time. His nerves were extremely fragile. The officials below him were still chattering, making his head hurt. So noisy. Apart from arguing, is there anyone who can help me? The sixth prince's emotional outburst and his angry voice silenced the officials for a moment, not daring to make a sound. You! Stand up and say it. Sixth prince pointed at a random official. If you can't give me a good explanation, I'll take your life. The officials were silent. No one dared to stand up. Only sixth prince's father-in-law dared to stand up. He was in the pro-war faction. His only son, Hakai, had died on the battlefield. He wanted to avenge his son. Sixth prince felt a bit guilty facing his father-in-law. He suppressed his violent emotions and listened to him patiently. Father-in-law's entire speech only had one main point: war. As for strategies, he didn't mention anything. He was a brute with muscles in his head. Fight? Fight with what? Use your head to fight thief Lu. They had already been cornered by Thief Lu into King's City. They were as cowardly as tortoises with low morale. There was no way they could win. The sixth prince resisted the urge to vomit blood in his heart. On the surface, he still had to calm his father-in-law. He still needed to rely on this father-in-law. Reporting to the acting king, an arrow was shot from outside the city, and there's a letter from that traitor Lu on it. The sixth prince perked up and hurriedly said, "Quickly read it out. Let's see what it says." There were not many officials of the northern frontier who knew the Chinese language. In the end, they could only pass the letter to the third prince and let him read it on their behalf. The third prince opened the letter and read it. His face was as gloomy as ink, and he seemed to have something stuck in his throat, unable to say a single word. "Third brother, even you are going to disobey my orders?" The sixth prince was enraged, and his breathing quickened. His chest rose and fell violently as he panted like a bull. The third prince was stunned for a moment before he read out the contents with difficulty. The seventh prince and the eighth prince had already become the prisoners of the Lu family. If the royal court of the northern borderline wanted to redeem them, they had to open the city and surrender. Not only that, the royal court would also become prisoners. If they agreed to this condition, she would only clean up the royal court and not hurt the other nobles. This was Jiang Pengji's ultimatum. If the north borderline did not know what was good for them, then they should not blame her for being ruthless. Scram! All of you, scram! The sixth prince lost control of his emotions. He rose from his throne and strode towards the third prince. He snatched the letter from the third prince's hand and tore it into pieces. "Who does she think she is? How dare you threaten us like this?" North Border Imperial Dynasty was the most noble race in North Border. According to their genealogical records, they were the descendants of the gods that the northern borderline believed in. Their bloodline was extremely noble. Don't think that only the aristocratic families of the Central Plains were particular about bloodlines. The barbarians of the northern borders were even more concerned about bloodlines. The northern border imperial court was the descendant of the gods. They were born to control the living beings of the earth. How could mere mortals control their life and death? Ridiculous. However, to put it bluntly, the descendants of gods and whatnot was just putting gold on their faces. If not for that, how could the imperial court suppress the other families in North Border and become the royal family? The third prince looked at the sixth prince's crazy and furious expression and asked coldly, "If they don't agree, what will happen to the seventh and eighth princes?" The sixth prince angrily pulled out the dagger at his waist and said to the third prince, "I am the acting king. You are just officials. Instead of helping me solve my problems, you are asking me what to do. Trash. All of you are trash. What use do I have for trash like you?" The third prince looked at him coldly. He knew that the brother in front of him was about to go crazy. The court was in chaos. Everyone was arguing, but they had no idea what to do. The next day, a mobile arrow tower was pushed to a place a few hundred steps away from the royal city. 2 naked people were hanging on it. They were the half-dead seventh prince and the eighth prince. 2 long banners were hanging around their necks. There were a few big words written on them. One of the banners said, "When the 2 princes die." The other banner said, "When our army breaks into the city, you will all be beheaded." The Lu family's emblem was drawn at the end of the banners. It was full of arrogance. When the guards on the walls of the royal city saw this, they were so scared that their legs turned to jelly. They hurriedly sent the news back to the imperial court. The sixth prince sat there in a daze. His face was so dark that he couldn't look at it anymore. The officials arguing under the tent couldn't make him come back to his senses. "Acting king, I am willing to go to war. Instead of being humiliated, it is better to regroup and go out of the city to fight to the death with the Lu traitor." The father-in-law wanted to avenge his son, who was the only seedling of his bloodline. Now that his only son was dead, it was equivalent to having no descendants. Instead of being humiliated by the enemy, it was better to go out and fight to his heart's content. The father-in-law was willing to fight to the death for the royal family, but the other nobles were not willing. Why should they die if they could live? How much was courage worth? They didn't care about etiquette, righteousness, honor, filial piety, loyalty, and trust. As long as they were alive, they could continue to enjoy glory and wealth. It was just a change of master that they were loyal to. If surrendering could save their lives, why would they want to die with the royal family? "Why don't we surrender?" an old official said anxiously. His voice wasn't loud, but it attracted everyone's attention. He plucked up his courage and said, "Now that the Lu traitor is like the sun in the sky, it's only a matter of time before he breaks the city. Instead of increasing casualties, it is better to..." Before he finished speaking, a white light flashed in the air. He felt a chill on his neck and hot blood splattered on the ground. The third prince sheathed his sword and said with a gloomy expression, "Surrendering before the battle. Are you still the unyielding men of the northern borderline?" Chapter 10:15. The third prince's words made all the officials blush. They were not ashamed, but angry. If they surrendered, they would at least have a way to live. This was called "a wise man submits to circumstances." How could it be called having no backbone? But no one dared to say so, lest the third prince suddenly kill them. After the court was dismissed, the officials left in twos and threes. Everyone's expression was not very good. The royal family wanted them to die with them. How could their expressions be good? The sky gradually darkened. The originally bustling royal city was now lonely and cold, filled with a somber atmosphere. The temperature difference between day and night in the northern kingdom was relatively large. The sun was scorching during the day, and the moonlight was as cold as ice at night. The seventh prince and the eighth prince were both injured, and they were tied up violently and hung on the tall archer tower. Not to mention their serious injuries, the enemy didn't even give them water to drink or food to eat. Even if their bodies were made of iron, they wouldn't be able to withstand it, let alone the two of them who had been pampered for more than 20 years. The eighth prince weakly called out, "Seventh brother, are you still awake?" He had been unconscious for most of the day. Now his head was very heavy, his body was hot and cold, and the scene in front of him was bright and dark. The seventh prince hung in mid-air with his head down and did not respond at all. But his body was still warm, so he should not be dead. The eighth prince was very sad. He was hung in mid-air and could faintly see the inside of royal city through the high wall. Not long ago, he was still a galloping, high-spirited prince of the northern kingdom, but now he was a prisoner of the enemy. His body was tied up and hung in public. It was a great humiliation. When he was young, he often imagined his future. In the blueprint he described, he would always be a person of high status. When did he ever think of becoming a prisoner? If it was any other time, he would have tried to commit suicide after suffering such humiliation. How could he live in this world? But both he and the seventh prince knew the contents of the long note hanging around their necks and knew that they were related to the day that thief Lu would attack the city. As long as they lived a little longer, maybe the officials of Royal City could come up with a strategy to deal with the enemy. Maybe they still had a chance to live. The eighth prince knew that the possibility was very slim, but it was better than no hope. Whether it was him or the seventh brother, they had to work hard to survive and must not let the enemy have his way. Thus, the eighth prince tried to call out to the seventh prince while he was still conscious, until the seventh prince woke up. They could not sleep because they might not be able to wake up again. During the long night, the two of them were so cold that their bodies turned blue. When the sun rose and the warm sunlight sprinkled on their bodies, they were almost moved to tears. Was it cruel? Compared to the evil deeds they had committed, Jiang Pengji was very merciful. She did not treat the two of them as pets and let them fight with wild beasts. She did not let the two of them have sex with wild beasts and take pleasure in it. She also did not let people humiliate their wives and daughters in front of them and amuse them by listening to their painful cries. She had done nothing, but they had done everything. The northern borderline plundered and captured countless people at the border. Men and women, which one of them had a good ending? The seventh prince ran a trading company and had sold countless Han women. When those women fell into the hands of the slave trading company, how could they be innocent and not be humiliated? There were too many violent and perverted nobles in the northern borderline. How could the number of Han female slaves who were played to death every day be few? The status of women in the northern borderline was indeed high, but it was only limited to the barbarian women of the northern borderline. The Han women were inferior to dogs. The seventh prince was an executioner, but the eighth prince was not innocent. One year, the seventh prince was seriously ill and could not recover. The doctor in the northern borderline said that to cure the illness, he had to remove the cornel from the chests of 10 clean young girls and boil them until they became fragrant minced meat. Then, with the medicine prescribed by the doctor, he would recover after taking it for 10 days. Therefore, the eighth prince spent a lot of money to buy 100 young girls from the trading company. The oldest was no more than 15 and the youngest was no more than 7 or 8 years old. According to the doctor's instructions, the seventh prince recovered after taking it for 10 days. After knowing what the eighth prince had done for him, the seventh prince not only did not feel that it was cruel, but he was grateful for the brotherly love. Compared to what they had done, was it cruel for Jiang Pengji to hang them in the air to dry? Are they dead? Jiang Pengji had a good sleep. The next day, she was refreshed, not at all like she had been fighting on the battlefield for a whole day. The civil and military officials looked at her with jealousy. Their lord was full of energy and her physical strength was beyond that of a normal person. Sun Wen sneered and replied, "They're still breathing. They're lucky to be hanging like this. The war in the northern borderline had been going on for long enough." He had not seen his grandson Lan Lan for more than half a year. Jiang Pengji pointed at the table and asked Sun Wen, "Wait for 2 more days. Let the generals and soldiers rest well." Sun Wen asked with a smile, "What if the northern borderline surrenders?" Jiang Pengji said, "If the northern borderline is willing to surrender, it depends on whether I am willing to accept it or not." From the beginning to the end, she had never intended to accept the surrender of the northern borderline. She had asked Wen Zheng to write that letter just to play with the northern borderline. Wasn't the seventh prince and the eighth prince not willing to swallow their anger just to buy time? If they found out that their hard work was in vain, they would definitely feel bitter. The people of the northern borderline are innocent, but their rich and powerful are not. They will only be a disaster if they are kept alive. Jiang Pengji's eyes were cold and flashed with a cold murderous intent. The people are easy to deal with. As long as you ensure that they do not have to worry about food and clothing, they will be deeply grateful. But the rich and powerful are different. Their greed and desires are endless. If we accept their surrender, it will be difficult to deal with them in the future. Instead of keeping them alive and becoming a disaster, we don't know when they will cause trouble for others. It is better to completely strangle them early on to avoid future worries. Sun Wen deeply agreed with this. If the rich and powerful of the northern borderline were kept alive, they could use their previous foundation to secretly stir up trouble. As long as they had a foundation, it would be easier to recover. This was a disaster. Their lord was someone who had her eyes on the world. How could she waste her energy on lowly people? Jiang Pengji said to Sun Wen, "If they are still unwilling to die when the time comes, then give them a quick death and send them on their way." Sun Wen nodded in agreement. Time flew, and another day passed. Jiang Pengji's army surrounded the royal city. Although they did not curse, they gave them endless pressure. The imperial court had not made a decision. Seeing that the seventh prince and the eighth prince could not hold on any longer, the nobles of the northern borderline were ready to make a move. They could not wait any longer. Jiang Pengji was about to rest when familiar footsteps came from outside the tent, followed by a familiar voice. "My lord, are you asleep?" Jiang Pengji got up and lit a candle. She said, "Zixiao, come in." "What's the matter?" After getting permission, Wei Ci opened the tent curtain and entered. He saw his lord holding an oil lamp. Half of her face was dyed a warm orange by the dim candlelight. Her brows looked even more gentle. Wei Si saw that she was dressed rather neatly. He lowered his head slightly and reported, "There is movement in the royal city of the northern borderline." Jiang Pengji raised her eyebrows and frowned. She asked him, "What movement?" Chapter 10:16. The confidant of the right chief minister of the northern borderline? Jiang Pengji thought for a moment and said, "Sneaking down the city wall in the middle of the night." It seems that the right chief minister is quite tactful. A wise man submits to circumstances, Wei Si said. Whether he is a wise man or not, it's up to me to decide. Jiang Pengji's eyes flashed with coldness. She smiled and said, "I'll go take a look at this person." Jiang Pengji sat on the seat of honor. The candle in the tent was lit and barely illuminated half of the space. A person was kneeling below. His upper body was almost touching the ground. Jiang Pengji pouted when she saw his trembling appearance. "I don't want to know your name. You just need to tell me why you're here." Jiang Pengji pulled over a chair and leaned half of her body against it. She looked lazy and sleepy. "It's getting late. It's not good for your health if you sleep too late." The person choked and his expression was slightly distorted. He said, "I am the confidant of the right chief minister, Su Hasa. Today, I'm here to surrender under the right chief minister's order." "Surrender?" Jiang Pengji sneered. She said, "Although I don't know who Su Hasa is, since he's the right chief minister, he must be one of the most powerful people in the northern borderline. I have a question. Your right chief minister has been receiving the salary of the northern borderline for so many years. Now that the northern borderline is facing a disaster, he betrays and surrenders just like that. It's hard to not be suspicious." The person said, "The right chief minister said that there's a widespread saying in the Central Plains, a good bird chooses a tree to nest in, a virtuous minister chooses a master to serve. The northern borderline's tyranny is harsh and makes the people have no way to live. It's obvious that he's not a wise ruler. The right chief minister can't bear to help the evildoer." Jiang Pengji smiled and praised him. "Your right chief minister is quite knowledgeable about Han culture. What he said is good." The person was delighted and quickly said, "Magistrate Lu, you're too kind." Jiang Pengji changed her posture and tried to make herself more comfortable. "It's not impossible to surrender. But how do I know that your right chief minister is sincere?" Jiang Pengji sneered and said mercilessly, "Not long ago, the northern borderline ordered a tribe to pretend to surrender. If it wasn't for my wise strategist who saw through the northern borderline's plot, I might have been the one to return in defeat. It's fine if you want to surrender, but you need to show some sincerity. Without sincerity, could it still be considered as defecting?" The man was overjoyed and quickly took out a tightly wrapped piece of parchment from his lapel. "This is the topographic map of Royal City. I present it to Governor Lu." A look of joy appeared on the man's face as he said, "The right minister is already fully prepared. As long as you accept our surrender, the right minister will coordinate with you from the inside and the outside. We will take the opportunity to open the gates of King's City and welcome the army into the city." Jiang Pengji raised her eyebrows and asked the man, "Really?" "Absolutely." At the same time, the right minister was anxiously waiting for news at home, like an ant on a hot pan. His trusted aide had been gone for 4 hours. Why hadn't there been any news yet? "Right minister, who are you waiting for?" Footsteps could be heard from outside the tent. Torches were lit up and a familiar voice was heard. Right Prime Minister Su Hasa felt a chill in his heart and quickly turned his head to look. The person who came was the haggard-looking third prince, and there were many people following behind him. He recalled the question asked by the third prince and was shocked. He quickly said, "Your Highness, I'm not waiting for anyone." The third prince sat boldly on the seat of honor. The corners of his mouth curled into a sinister smile. He stared at the right minister as if he was looking at a dead man. "You're not waiting for anyone?" The third prince said pointedly, "I was patrolling the streets just now and caught a trusted aide who claimed to be the right minister. He even hid the topographic map of King City. I was shocked. The right minister was loyal to the northern borderline. How could he betray the enemy? I was too angry, so I ordered people to interrogate him. That person didn't live up to expectations and died. To prevent the right minister's reputation from being tarnished, I specially brought people over to question him. If that person framed me, I can clear the right minister's name so that no one can use this to attack the right minister. After the third prince said this, the right minister's plump body could not help but tremble slightly. His front and back were covered in sticky sweat. He said decisively, "I was born a man of the northern borderline and I will die a ghost of the northern borderline. My loyalty can be seen by the heavens. What trusted aide who had the topographic map of King City? Someone must be jealous of me and deliberately framed me. The third prince is wise and won't be deceived by vile people." The third prince's lips curled up slightly. He said, "The right minister is also an old man of 2 dynasties. You are my father's right-hand man. I naturally trust you." The right minister nodded repeatedly, fully demonstrating what servile meant. The third prince sneered in his heart. That old man. The third prince made up his mind and continued, "Although the right minister was slandered, he is not completely innocent. In the future, you have to restrain your subordinates and don't let others take advantage of the loopholes. I have already killed that trusted aide and sent someone to bring this topographic map to Lu Buwei." The right minister opened his eyes wide in shock. It seemed that he did not hear what the third prince said. "The dagger is revealed." The third prince said in a voice that only the 2 of them could hear, "Whether it is success or failure, it all depends on today. As long as Jiang Pengji died, no, even if she was only seriously injured, the northern borderline could take the opportunity to catch their breath." The right minister's mouth was dry. He was so scared that he broke out in a cold sweat. He looked at the third prince with respect and fear. The third prince left the right minister's residence, but his expression did not relax. Instead, it was so serious that it could drip water. The 6th prince was the acting king, but he was useless. He did not have the ability to suppress the officials. The hearts of the people in the court were wavering. Many people already had the idea of surrendering. They would make their move in a day or 2. The third prince simply brought people to wait for them. Sure enough, they caught many of them. "Master, is the northern borderline really doomed?" The third prince was filled with unwillingness. "I don't believe it." Because of his unwillingness, he used the trick of sending his trusted aide to pretend to be the right minister's aide and take the opportunity to assassinate Lu Shi. If he succeeded, once Lu Shi was dead, the enemy would definitely retreat. The northern borderline would still have room to counterattack. If he failed... Lu Shi had learned his lesson. Let's see if he still dared to accept the nobles from the northern borderline who surrendered. Maybe they would be killed as soon as the messenger expressed his intentions. These nobles enjoyed the benefits given by the royal family. Now that disaster was upon them, they wanted to fly away alone. In their dreams, if the northern borderline was doomed, the royal family was destined to be destroyed. These people would be buried with the royal family. Crazy thoughts occupied his mind. The third prince looked calm on the surface, but his heart was already crazy. Outside the royal city, in Jiang Pengji's camp. "Hand over the item. If it's true, your right minister will be rewarded handsomely." Jiang Pengji pointed at the table in front of her. The man bowed and stepped forward, holding the topographic map of the royal city in both hands. The man was less than 5 steps away from Jiang Pengji. She suddenly asked, "Oh right, your right minister is so knowledgeable. Has he heard of a word in the Han family?" "What word?" Chapter 10:17. When the assassin heard the words, "The dagger will be revealed," his eyes widened and his expression became ferocious. He immediately drew his sharp blade and pounced on Jiang Pengji. The snow-white blade drew a white light in the air. They were less than 5 steps apart. If he could seize the opportunity to kill this person, it would be worth it even if he had to sacrifice his life. However, Jiang Pengji was not a weakling. She would not be chased around the tent and run for her life. She kicked the table in front of her away. The small table flew towards the assassin. The assassin did not dodge. He pounced on Jiang Pengji and let the table fall on him. He knew that he only had one chance. If he missed it, he would not have another chance to kill Jiang Pengji. Moreover, it was just a table. How painful could it be if it fell on him? If not for Jiang Pengji, the assassin's judgment would not have been wrong. He could even be considered decisive. Unfortunately, the assassin's target was Jiang Pengji. She could not be measured by common sense. A ceremonial tablet in her hands could become a weapon that could dismember a corpse. How could a table be less lethal than a ceremonial tablet in her hands? The assassin only had his target in his eyes. The dagger in his hand was already aimed at Jiang Pengji's chest. At the same time, the table flew over and accurately hit the assassin's chest. In the next moment, the table made a cracking sound. The table's legs were split into pieces. Wood chips flew everywhere. The assassin felt that he had not been hit by a table. He had clearly been hit by a small mountain. Several of his sternum had been broken in an instant. Because of the huge force of the attack, he was sent flying backward for more than 10 feet. He fell to the ground like a rag doll. His internal organs were shattered. Sticky blood gushed up his throat and filled his mouth. Half of his face was a bloody mess. Jiang Pengji stood up leisurely. Her expression was calm as usual. The strategist in the tent was speechless. Everything had ended before it had even begun. Feng Zhen maintained his posture of pouncing forward. His expression was frozen in an awkward angle. He looked comical and awkward. Although Wei Si's expression was not as exaggerated, the nervousness and worry on his face were not fake. His pale and pretty lips were stained with a layer of white. My lord. Feng Zhen looked at the sawdust on the ground in disbelief. He couldn't believe his eyes. This table was not made of wood. It was clearly made of pure gold and silver. Otherwise, how could it have such destructive power? Jiang Pengji's eyes were cold. She looked at the assassin without any warmth. The assassin was hit head-on by the table, and his entire body was sent flying for more than 10 feet. His sternum was almost completely shattered, and his internal organs were pierced through by the shattered sternum. It seemed that he would not survive for long. What are you shouting for? Call someone over to clean up his body. I'll have nightmares if I leave it here. Feng Zhen, nightmare? My lord, are you serious? Feng Zhen came back to his senses. He realized that he was so scared that he was breaking out in a cold sweat. The front and back of his shirt were already soaked. The scene just now was too thrilling. The distance between the lord and the assassin was less than 5 steps. It was a real life and death moment. If Jiang Pengji was killed, the great undertaking that had just begun would be forced to stop. The 3 armies were like a group of dragons without a leader, allowing the northern borderline to take advantage of them. The guards outside heard the commotion and rushed into the tent. They saw the paralyzed assassin on the ground and hurriedly half-knelt to ask for forgiveness. Jiang Pengji's expression softened slightly. She said, "It's okay. You just have to drag this person away. Wait, leave this map behind." She picked up the map of the interior of the royal city. 4 guards each grabbed one of the assassin's limbs and carried him out. If it wasn't for the large pool of undried blood on the ground, who would have guessed that an assassination had happened in the tent? The guards went out. Wei Si stepped forward to ask for forgiveness. No matter what, he was the one who brought the assassin to Jiang Pengji. He had failed to identify the assassin. He was guilty of negligence. Jiang Pengji raised her eyebrows. This is not Zixiao's fault. Even if there were 100 assassins, they wouldn't be able to hurt me, let alone one. Feng Zhen, who was beside her, also tried to persuade her. The northern borderline refuses to give up. I thought that they were an arrow at the end of its flight. I didn't expect them to still have the strength to resist. Although Zixiao is at fault, it wasn't the main cause. Since my lord has already forgiven him, Zixiao shouldn't be too concerned. Jiang Pengji couldn't change Wei Si's mind. She could only symbolically forfeit his salary for 3 months. Wei Si felt that the punishment was too light and tried to make her make it more severe. The most important thing now isn't to pursue your crimes. The northern borderline is the main culprit. Jiang Pengji frowned impatiently. Her tone was slightly nasty. If Zixiao really feels that he has made a mistake, I'll settle it with you in the future. As for now, there's no hurry. The news of Jiang Pengji's assassination quickly reached Sun Wen and Qiguan Rang's ears. The two of them rushed over and found that the main tent was neatly arranged. It was not as chaotic as they had imagined. I heard that my lord was attacked by an assassin. Are you all right? Qiguan Rang's expression was still calm, but his clothes were a little crooked. It was obvious that he had rushed over in a hurry. His breathing was also a little hurried. Jiang Pengji mocked him mercilessly. No. If assassins are all at this level, it'd be strange if they could hurt me. Hearing this, Sun Wen decisively swallowed his questions. Needless to say, his lord was definitely not the one who was at a disadvantage. Zidao, look at this map of the royal city. Jiang Pengji handed the map that the assassin had brought over to Sun Wen. Sun Wen took a few glances at it and could roughly determine its authenticity. I'm at least 80% sure that the map is real. In order to assassinate my lord, the northern borderline has put in a lot of effort. They actually used a real map as bait. Sun Wen mumbled. Jiang Pengji responded with a cold smile. What do you mean by putting in a lot of effort? If that's the case, the right chief minister is really pitiful. Sun Wen frowned. The assassin used the right chief minister of the northern borderline as an excuse? The northern borderline had always looked down on the Han family of the Central Plains. They were very hostile toward them. The right chief minister of the northern borderline was a typical example. I forgot to mention that the left chief minister of the northern borderline was Wu Liba. Unlike the Central Plains, where the right was respected, the northern borderline had always respected the left. That's not all. Jiang Pengji said with certainty, in my opinion, the right chief minister most likely sincerely wanted to defect, so the map he brought was also real. But he never expected that the messenger he sent would be intercepted halfway and replaced. Jiang Pengji became vigilant when she saw the assassin. This was because the assassin had developed a murderous intent towards her. If it was someone who truly defected, that person might have evil intentions, but he would never dare to have murderous intent. Jiang Pengji also discovered that the assassin's clothes did not fit him very well. They looked wrinkled and wrinkled. Others would think that they were wrinkled from squatting, so they looked messy. However, Jiang Pengji had a good grasp of the measurements. She knew in her heart whether the clothes were not neatly dressed or not fitting. The assassin's clothes were very likely not his own. Chapter 10:18. Jiang Pengji praised the right minister for his knowledge of Han culture. The assassin said compliments from the magistrate of Liuzhou, but his eyes showed some disdain. This disdain was not directed at Jiang Pengji, but at the right minister. According to her speculation, the real messenger should have been intercepted and killed. Because the assassin and the messenger were similar in size, and to be safe, the assassin wore the messenger's clothes, carried the real blueprint, and went to the capital in a bamboo basket. He disguised himself as the messenger and tried to assassinate Jiang Pengji. She did not suspect much about the real master of the assassin. Jiang Pengji briefly explained her speculation. Sun Wen pondered for a while and already had a suspect in his heart. It's probably the third prince's man, Sun Wen said. The third prince of the northern borderline studied under Wu Liba. This pair of master and disciple are rare smart people in the northern borderline. Because of Wu Liba's influence, the third prince is quite knowledgeable about Han culture. However, he also learned his master's temper. He's stubborn and arrogant, but he's loyal to the northern borderline. There shouldn't be anyone else besides him who could come up with an assassination plan at this juncture. If it wasn't for the Lord's outstanding martial arts, she might have failed miserably. The northern borderline was now an arrow at the end of its flight, and the nobles were fence-sitters. The possibility of them secretly defecting to the enemy was extremely high. She never expected that someone would intercept the messenger and impersonate her to assassinate Jiang Pengji. Whether it's this person or not, I'll put this on his head. Someone had to take the blame for this matter. The third prince was the most suspicious person. If he didn't take the blame, who would? I have to thank him. It just so happens that I have a ready-made excuse to slaughter all the nobles in the northern borderline. As long as there was a good reason, the massacre was not a big deal. Not to mention slaughtering all the nobles in the northern borderline and Guizhou, even killing more would be justifiable. Other than that, the nobles in the northern borderline were the richest. Plundering their family's wealth would fill up Jiang Pengji's private treasury. The enemy had given her a ready-made excuse. If she didn't make good use of it, wouldn't she be letting herself down? The veins on Sun Wen's eyebrows twitched. He glanced at the other three and realized that they were indifferent to the slaughter Jiang Pengji mentioned. Recalling Qiguan Rang, Wei Ci, and Feng Zhen's conduct, he felt that the Lord was so lawless, more or less, because they connived her. Even if he really wanted to slaughter them and plunder their wealth, he couldn't just say it out loud. However, the Lord was willful and the subordinates indulged her. Sun Wen could only turn a blind eye to it. It's too late today. Go and rest first. Send people to keep an eye on the movements in Royal City. If anyone defected again, capture them all. There is still a tough battle to fight. The nobles of the northern borderline know that there is no hope of defecting, so they will definitely find another way out. After a brief discussion, Jiang Pengji saw the sleep scars on Sun Wen and Qiguan Rang's faces. Her heart softened and she chased them away to sleep. Feng Zhen and the others took their leave. Wei Ci also prepared to get up and leave, but he had barely taken 2 steps when he realized that his sleeve was being tugged at. Wei Ci glanced at his sleeve. His line of sight followed the hand on the sleeve and moved up, just in time to meet his lord's eyes. At this time, Feng Zhen and the other 2 had already left the main tent. My lord? Jiang Pengji said, didn't I say that I'll settle this with you in the future? She purposely emphasized a certain word. Regardless of whether it was his previous life or his current one, Wei Ci had always been a person of great virtue. He was like a wisp of bright moon and cool breeze. When had he ever come into contact with such vulgar language? Therefore, Wei Ci was stunned for a while before he understood Jiang Pengji's hint. At that moment, he felt all the blood in his body rush to his head. His ears started to hallucinate. My lord. How can you say such vulgar words? Wei Ci did not believe that Jiang Pengji would mess around in the military camp. However, he could not just say flowery words, let alone such vulgar words. How could words and actions be the same? Jiang Pengji smiled and teased him. What vulgar? Is it the end? Wei Ci was speechless. This was definitely not the His Majesty he knew. However, Wei Ci had forgotten that even the His Majesty in his memory was Feng Zhen's gang of scoundrels. He drank with women and visited brothels. At this moment, Jiang Pengji was just destroying Wei Ci's inner image of a god. She wanted him to know that the god in his heart was also a person. After a while, Wei Ci left the main tent with a conflicted expression and returned to his own tent. Not long after he left, a swift black shadow followed him back to the tent. The patrolling soldiers did not notice it at all. Wei Ci looked at Jiang Pengji and sighed again and again. My lord, you have to go back once the sky is bright, so as not to cause panic among the people. Wei Ci did not have the ability to sneak out of the main tent without arousing suspicion, but Jiang Pengji could sneak out of Wei Ci's tent without being discovered. It was obvious that there was nothing going on between them, but they still acted like they were having an affair. Wei Ci was also mentally exhausted. Jiang Pengji did not care so much. The weather was still hot. Wei Ci's body temperature was relatively low. It was comfortable to hold him. She had a good night's sleep. The third prince, who was still waiting for news, was in despair. If the assassination was successful, the camp of the traitor Lu would be in chaos. However, after one night, the order of the camp remained the same. It could be seen that the confidant he sent out had failed in the assassination. Rubbing his sore and swollen eyes, the third prince walked with heavy steps to the court with a pair of reddened eyes and a green stubble. Not only did the third prince not sleep for the whole night, but half of the ministers in the court could not sleep either. They looked at the third prince with trepidation. They were afraid that he would spread the news that they had secretly colluded with the enemy. If that happened, they would die in the hands of their own people before Jiang Pengji attacked. What was surprising was that the third prince maintained his silence. He looked at the quarrel in the court coldly, like a wooden man. Many old ministers earnestly persuaded the sixth prince. Acting prince, in my opinion, we should surrender to the traitor Lu now. At least we can preserve some of our descendants so that we can make a comeback in the future. The sixth prince was so angry that he laughed. If they surrendered, the royal family of the northern borderline would definitely be slaughtered. The ministers in front of him could turn around and beg for mercy and flatter the traitor Lu. At the very least, they could preserve their glory and wealth. On what basis? On what basis? The royal family was nobler than them. On what basis should they use the blood of the royal family in exchange for the survival of these lowly people? Anger brewed in the sixth prince's heart. Half of the ministers in the court were inclined to surrender. They could not help but be anxious. The seventh and eighth princes had already reached their limits. In other words, there was not much time left for the northern borderline. If they did not make a decision, once the two princes breathed their last, Jiang Pengji would lead the army to attack the royal city. There was clearly a bright path in front of them. Why should they accompany the royal family to hell? In order to appease their anger, a few old ministers were willing to help hide the blood of the royal family and find an opportunity to make a comeback in the future. If they did not surrender to the enemy, the third prince would really be fooled. He believed that they were really thinking for the sake of the royal family. Report, the enemy outside the city is moving again. The messenger presented a letter, which attracted everyone's attention. This time, the letter was not written in the Chinese characters of the Central Plains. It was written in the barbarian language. Everyone could read it without any difficulty. Chapter 10:19. In terms of poison, no one could beat Jiang Pengji. Not only was her mouth poisonous, but her ability to invert right and wrong was something that others could only look up to. It was the third prince who intercepted the right chief minister's trusted aide and took the opportunity to assassinate her. She made it sound like the right chief minister and the third prince had sent their own messengers. She accepted the third prince's surrender and promised that if the third prince helped her to take down King's City, she would spare his life. Seeing that the deal was about to be concluded, the right chief minister also sent his men to surrender. Who knew that the surrender was fake and the assassination was real? She was lucky to escape. In her anger, she killed both of them. One of them was burned to ashes and the other was hung outside the camp. The third prince had never imagined that Jiang Pengji would lie. She was trying to force him to his death. The sixth prince glared at the third prince. His eyes were vicious and sinister, as if he wanted to skin the third prince alive. The eldest prince saw the situation and quickly stepped forward to persuade him. Anyone could betray the third prince, but not the third prince. Please calm down, acting prince. You have a deep brotherhood with my third brother. You know him very well. How could he betray the country? The sixth prince sneered. Isn't the man hanging in Lu Shi's camp the third prince's trusted aide? The eldest prince was speechless. He quickly looked at the right chief minister. The right chief minister, Suhasa's heart skipped a beat. His plump cheeks were covered in sticky sweat. He was terrified. He knew that if he proved that the third prince did not betray the north borderline, he would be admitting that he had betrayed the north borderline. For the sake of his own life, he could only insist that the third prince had sent his trusted aide to the enemy. He had sent his aide to assassinate Lu Shi. The eldest prince threatened, "Right, Chief Minister, think carefully before you speak." He did not have a good relationship with the third prince, but he could not allow him to be slandered to death. The right Chief Minister Suesa secretly clenched his teeth, but his words indirectly sentenced the third prince to death. "Last night, I sent my trusted subordinates to assassinate that traitor Lu. Unfortunately, that traitor Lu was treacherous and had countless masters guarding him, so the assassination failed. I don't know anything else." As soon as the right minister's voice fell, the third prince's face turned pale. The scene in front of him was dim and uncertain. His legs were weak and he almost couldn't stand straight. "Good, you are really my good brother," the sixth prince laughed in anger and pointed at the third prince. "Guards, now that we are facing a great enemy, we brothers should work together to fight against that traitor Lu. How can we fight among ourselves and harm ourselves?" The first prince tried to stop him. "Acting king, you can't trust the words of that traitor Lu. Didn't that demoness set up a scheme to make you kill third brother?" The sixth prince was so enraged that half of his face had turned ashen. "How dare you? Are you the substitute king, or am I the substitute king? There's no place for you to speak here, back off." The first prince had no choice but to retreat. Although the third prince was not killed on the spot, he was arrested and imprisoned. "Third brother, I will think of a way to protect you. Sixth brother is no longer reliable, he has already gone mad." The eldest prince secretly went to the prison to comfort the third prince. The third prince sneered and declined to comment. After the first prince left, the smile on the corner of the third prince's mouth gradually widened. His laughter overflowed from his throat, and the volume of his voice went from low to high and crazy. "Northern borderline is going to perish, it's really going to perish, master. I can't protect northern borderline, I'm useless." The third prince had laughed enough. His crimson eyes were dripping with turbid tears. His strength seemed to have been sucked out of his body as he slumped to the ground. He took out a dagger from his pocket and pulled out the blade. He had already foreseen the end of northern borderline, but he did not want to see it fall into the hands of the enemy. It was better to end his life before that happened. At least before he died, that traitor Lu had not succeeded, and northern borderline had not changed hands. In the underworld, he would still have some face to see his master. The dagger drew a white light in the air, and the sharp blade pierced straight into his chest. Sharp pain spread to his limbs and bones. The veins on the third prince's forehead bulged, and his bloodshot eyes almost popped out of their sockets. His eyes were filled with hatred and unwillingness. His life was rapidly draining from his body. "Report, His Highness has committed suicide in the prison." The first prince heard the news and was so shocked that his mind went blank. "Third brother, committed suicide?" The sixth prince's reaction was similar, but he asked a question. "Third brother really committed suicide to escape punishment?" The third prince still had a younger brother who tricked his brother, the fifth prince. Although the fifth prince was very stupid and had always been a hindrance to his brother, when he heard the news of his brother's death, he immediately rushed to the palace to make a scene. The imperial court was in a mess, and the right chief minister was uneasy. Only the real culprit was still laughing at the situation. Feng Zhen and the others had always felt that they were ruthless enough, but when it came to their lord, they felt that they were still far from it. She got rid of a thorn in her side without any bloodshed. Who else could it be? It was a pity that such a lord did not become a counselor. Sun Wen sighed faintly. Meeting the lord, northern borderline's fate has come to an end. Although it was said that the winner took all and the loser was in the wrong, there was still the feeling of the fox mourning the death of the rabbit. It was rare for northern borderline to have two smart people, but they both died under the lord's schemes. Wei Ci said, "The lord is the child of destiny. Northern borderline fighting against her will naturally lead to death. Sun Wen looked up at Wei Ci. The other's expression was very calm, without the slightest hint of flattery. The child of destiny? Unifying the world and dominating the 9 states, Wei Ci said. Do you not believe me? Sun Wen chuckled and stroked his beard. If that's the case, I've made a huge profit. I've made a huge bet. No matter how tragic the third prince's death was, he was just an enemy. Wei Ci and the others did not have the time to pity him. The army rested for 2 days and prepared to attack northern borderline again. When the loud horn sounded, hundreds of thousands of soldiers surrounded King's city. Everyone in the city was in a state of panic. 7th prince and 8th prince are not dead yet. What does that traitor Lu mean by this? 6th prince, who had a pair of thick dark circles under his eyes, questioned the officials in an irritable manner. The officials were anxious, and only after a long while did one person step forward. This person said in a trembling voice, "Acting king, that traitor Lu ordered people to cut the ropes on the 2 princes." 6th prince was so shocked that his face turned pale. 3 days had passed. 7th prince and 8th prince were extremely tenacious. They had not breathed their last and even had some consciousness left. Military counselor Feng, those 2 are still breathing. Feng Zhen put his hands in his sleeves and closed his eyes slightly. He sneered. Still breathing? Cut the ropes and they're not breathing anymore. The soldier's heart skipped a beat. He obeyed and climbed up the archer tower. 7th prince and 8th prince were still in a daze. When they heard that they were going to cut the ropes, their eyes lit up. 8th prince coughed up blood and said in a hoarse voice, "Traitor Lu, how dare you go back on your word?" Although 7th prince did not say anything, his expression was also crazed. The soldier ignored the 2 of them and cut the ropes with his sword. The archer tower was extremely tall. Even a living person would die if they jumped down, let alone 7th prince and 8th prince who were on their last breath. When the 2 corpses landed on the ground, Jiang Pengji pulled out the sword from her waist and pointed it at King's city of northern borderline. Chapter 10:20. Wherever the blade pointed, it was invincible. Following Jiang Pengji's order, the imposing army launched a powerful attack on the city walls. The northern borderline was a nomadic people, and the vast grassland was the stage for them to dominate. Although the city was built in the style of the Han family of the Central Plains, the defense ability of the city was far from the standard of a capital city. Faced with the ferocious besiegers, the northern borderline unsurprisingly retreated step by step. Even though they occupied the city walls, they did not last long. The city wall was destroyed by the crazy bombardment of the catapults, and the guards on the city gate could not withstand the wave of arrows that came from below. After only a quarter of an hour, the city gate of the Beijiang kingdom was breached. Jiang Pengji led the army up the city wall and opened the 4 city gates. Report. Acting king, that traitor Lu has broken through the city gates and is leading his troops to attack the imperial court. Report. Thief Lu is leading troops to attack the imperial court. A gate has fallen. Report. Bad news came one after another. The 6th prince was wearing the dragon robe that only the king of the northern borderline was qualified to wear. He sat on the throne in a daze, as if he did not hear what the messenger had said. He stared blankly ahead, as if waiting for someone. It was unknown when the officials in the court had dispersed. A large number of palace maids hurriedly packed up their belongings and prepared to escape. Everyone only cared about themselves. How could they care about others? The enemy's shouts were getting closer and closer. The 1st prince and the 5th prince, who didn't have time to escape, put on their armor and led the remaining soldiers to make a last stand. Seeing that the imperial court was about to fall, the 6th prince seemed to have sensed something and finally came back to his senses. A hint of madness appeared on his pale and tired face. He got up from the throne and walked down the stairs leisurely. He poured the candle oil that he had prepared in the morning all over the tent and the luxurious tassels used for decorations. The 6th prince murmured with a ferocious expression. "I will always be the king of the northern borderline, He waved his hand and knocked over the 9 dragons playing with Pearl's bronze lamp used for illumination in the tent. The flame that fell from the lamp touched the lamp oil, and the fire spread rapidly. He splashed oil on his clothes, and in a short time he had turned into a man of blazing fire. As the raging fire burned his body, the 6th prince uncontrollably let out a blood-curdling scream that sounded like a ghost being tortured. The scream was so shrill that anyone who heard it would feel their hair stand on end. After a fierce battle, the 1st prince and the 5th prince were covered in blood. Their bodies were covered in wounds, and they were on the verge of death. But no matter how they killed or how they tried to break out of the encirclement, the enemy seemed to be endless, forcing them to retreat step by step. Royal court. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the blazing flames in the direction of the royal court. The 1st prince was shocked. 6th brother, he had thought that with the 6th prince's temperament, he would lead the crowd to beg for mercy from the enemy. He had not expected that the 6th prince would choose to burn himself. The eldest prince was distracted, but his enemy was not. Facing the siege of a dozen soldiers armed with spears, they had no strength to resist. Puff, puff. The sound of a spear piercing into flesh and blood rang out. The 1st prince and the 5th prince had their backs against each other. Long spears were stuck in front of them, and their bodies were riddled with bloody holes from which scarlet blood flowed. Swallowing their last breaths, they closed their eyes unwillingly, taking away their last reluctance to leave this world. Jiang Pengji studied the topographic map of the royal city of the northern borderline overnight and figured out the residences of the nobles. After conquering King's City, she immediately sent people to surround these places and stop the nobles from the northern borderline who intended to escape. People could die, but their property had to be left behind. Climbing up the broken city wall, Qiguan Rang squinted slightly. There was an indecipherable look in his eyes. Ever since I was born, I never thought that one day I would be able to climb this city wall and overlook the once arrogant and insufferably arrogant northern borderline. Qiguan Rang's hand in his sleeves clenched the feather fan tightly. This was the only way he could restrain his urge to lose control and vent his anger. The northern borderline was a huge rock that pressed down on his heart. When he occasionally thought of it, he always felt breathless. Now that he had completely stepped on it, he turned around and looked. The northern borderline, which was once like a mountain, did not seem like much. Among the officials under Jiang Pengji, his background and social status were only slightly higher than Su Ke's. He was the son of a Han woman and a northern borderline horse bandit. He was born a filthy bastard. The Han people despised him, and the northern borderline could not tolerate him. If he was not smart and had a more meticulous mind than others, how could he have grown up safely? In the end, Qiguan Rang still sided with the Central Plains. Qiguan Rang had a mother who was willing to compromise, a teacher who taught him earnestly, a wife who was deeply in love with him, and a lovely daughter. Qiguan Rang had chosen his own side. The existence of the north borderline had become a thorn in his heart, constantly reminding him of his unbearable birth. There will be no more northern borderline in the future. Wei Ci saw Qiguan Rang secretly climbing up the city wall. He was afraid that something would happen to him, so he quietly followed and watched him. Qiguan Rang heard Wei Ci's voice and did not look surprised. He did not directly answer Wei Ci's statement. He only said lightly, as long as the northern borderline still exists, there will always be new herdsmen. They will become the new northern borderline. The crux of the northern borderline's barbarism and bloodthirstiness was never bloodline. Even if the Han people lived in the northern borderline, they had to adapt to the environment there. They were gradually transformed into a nomadic people who galloped on horses. If this was not fundamentally changed, there might be a new northern borderline that would invade the Central Plains people in a few hundred years. How could the Lord not know this? Wei Ci smiled faintly and said, "She knows what she's doing." Qiguan Rang's eyes slanted and his peripheral vision fell on Wei Ci. His eyes sparkled as if he was sizing something up. After a while, he said, "Is she the one who knows what she's doing, or are you the one who knows what you're doing?" Wei Ci's heart skipped a beat. He said calmly, Wenjing, what do you mean? Qiguan Rang folded his hands in his sleeves and looked calm. The corners of his lips curled up slightly, but there was not a trace of warmth in it. He said, the Lord will always be the Lord. If she finds out that you have any disloyal intentions, Wei Zixiao, you and I will definitely fight it out. Wei Ci suddenly thought of the meteorite warning in his previous life. Looking at Qiguan Rang's expressionless face, he vaguely understood something. No one in the world can be more loyal to her than me. Qiguan Rang snorted and did not comment. Although Wei Ci was a warm person, Qiguan Rang was very suspicious. Other than his family and the Lord, he kept a certain distance from everyone. There was one thing that Qiguan Rang still could not understand. What was Wei Ci's motive for joining the Lord? In the beginning, there were only him and Su Ku in the Lord's tent. There was no need to explain the reason. Feng Jin had no choice but to join because of the earthquake in Shangjing. At that time, the Lord was poor and had no reputation. How could she attract Wei Ci to join her from afar? Because he could not figure it out, Qiguan Rang's suspicion towards Wei Ci had not been let go until now. The two of them descended the city wall. The battle cries in the city had gradually subsided. The air was filled with the smell of burning. Qiguan Rang sorted out his emotions and regained his usual composure. Chapter 10:21. Wenjing and Zixiao, you're here. Where did you go? I couldn't find you. Jiang Pengji's armor was covered in blood. Some were fresh, some were dried and dark. She looked like she had just returned from the battlefield. The broadsword beside her had countless cuts. The edge of the blade was curled up, and there were pieces of flesh hanging on it. Jiang Pengji didn't feel anything. She held a few gold ingots in her left hand and a dozen strings of pearls in her right. She was surrounded by chests of all sizes. Each chest was filled with countless gold, silver, and jewelry. They were so bright that they were blinding. That was not the end of it. More soldiers came over with boxes. Looking at their strenuous movements, one could imagine how heavy the boxes were. Without exception, these boxes were looted from the private storehouses of the nobles and the royal family. Qiguan Rang said, the city wall has a nice view, so I climbed up to take a look. What view is so nice? Jiang Pengji held a dozen strings of pearls in her hand. Each pearl was round and full, with a warm luster. They were all top-grade pearls. The audience in the streaming room shouted, if you came a little later, you wouldn't get a share. The corner of Qiguan Rang's mouth twitched. Conquering the northern borderline and leading a strong army would be recorded in history. But when the Lord said that, there was a lingering sense of banditry. They were a regular army, not a mob. TSK. The northern borderline is really rich. If I had known, would have been more ruthless. Jiang Pengji threw the pearls and the gold ingots back. Hearing the sound of the objects colliding, the audience's hearts were in their throats. What if the wastrel accidentally broke it? Fireworks Ji Yuan, streamer, put your hand into the box and stir it. Let me see if it's the same as the props in the TV series. It's such a big box. Is it possible that it's the same inside and out? From the bottom to the top, it's all real gold, silver, and jewelry? Isha Jixing, it must be real. This isn't a TV series. It can't be that there's only one layer on top and the bottom is all hollow. If the nobles of the northern borderline dared to deceive the streamer with fake goods, the streamer might drag them back from the king of hell and whip their corpses. The fairy queen's crimson, dear brain master, you've made a fortune. Can I buy on Double 11? POTUS mommy, I'm looking for a streamer who can help me empty the shopping cart. Jiang Pengji secretly curled her lips. The north borderline would not put fake goods in the private storage of the manor. If the goods presented were fake, someone must have pocketed it. However, she was strict with the army, so no one would dare to do such a thing. If someone committed a crime, they would at most be greedy for a small fortune. If the water was too clear, there would be no fish. Jiang Pengji would not go overboard. As long as it did not violate the principles of discipline, such as robbery or killing the innocent, she could turn a blind eye to it. Qiguan Rang smiled and said, "It's not too late now." The northern borderline imperial court had already been destroyed, and most of the nobles were in Wangcheng. The rest were all small tribes that could be completely annihilated in a short amount of time. Wouldn't all the money they plundered belong to the Lord? Jiang Pengji felt comforted when she heard that, but the more comforting thing was yet to come. Jiang Nongqin, dressed in armor, walked over with a bloody aura. She cupped her fists and said, "Greetings, my lord. Officer Jiang, do you want to come and see if there's anything you like here? You can pick some to reward the soldiers of the female camp." Jiang Pengji greeted them warmly. In this battle, the female camp not only made great contributions on the battlefield, but they also made great contributions to the logistics. She would not mistreat the meritorious service, but her attitude was too bold. "On behalf of the female camp, I thank my lord for the generous reward." Jiang Nongqin said, "My lord, the soldiers found a severely rotten male corpse in the imperial court. The male corpse was rotten and had maggots, but he was wearing clothes that looked like a dragon robe. After questioning the palace maids carefully, we found out his identity. Bring him up for a look." Jiang Pengji raised her eyebrows and said, "Could it be the king of the north borderline?" The soldiers of the female camp carried a stretcher up. The stretcher was covered with a thin blanket, but even so, it could not hide the overwhelming stench. Jiang Pengji did not mind the stench. She squatted down and lifted the thin blanket, revealing the male corpse in the dragon robe. In less than a second, densely packed bullet screens covered the sky and covered almost every corner of the screen. The audience was experienced and knowledgeable, but they had never seen a male corpse that had rotted to such a serious extent. The taste was too strong. Half of his face had rotted away. Corpse fluid flowed everywhere. Densely packed maggots crawled out of his half-exposed nose bone and burrowed into the hole below his brow bone. There was almost no part of his skin and flesh that was unscathed. Upon closer inspection, there were also white and fat maggots wriggling inside. His neck and collarbone were almost rotten. His skin and flesh hung unstably. One could vaguely see maggots crawling up and down his collarbone and neck bone. Further down, the audience did not dare to watch at all. They all went to vomit. However, Jiang Pengji said calmly, looking at the age of his bones, "His age does match." Jiang Nongqin also sighed with emotion. "I heard that the king of the north borderline was also an ambitious and ruthless man of his generation. I did not expect him to suffer a stroke and be paralyzed. He starved to death on his bed. His corpse had rotted to this extent, but no one collected it. This kind of ending is really sad. Each of his 9 princes had died a tragic death. Even he had ended up in such a state. Sad." Jiang Pengji sneered. "In troubled times, human life is like grass. If I fail, I may end up worse than him. No matter what, at least the king of the north borderline would have a complete corpse. In troubled times, many people died without a complete corpse." Jiang Nongqin said, "My lord, your martial arts are prosperous. You will certainly live a long and peaceful life." Jiang Pengji could not help but laugh. "Carry it down and burn it. Leaving a rotting corpse will easily cause an epidemic. It's not clean." The corpse of the king of the north borderline was carried down. Li Yun brought up another 4 corpses. "Who are they?" One was charred, another had livor mortis, and the other 2 were badly mutilated. Even their own mothers would not be able to recognize them. Li Yun, who was at the side, said, "According to identification, this charred corpse is the 6th son of the king of the north borderline. This is the 3rd son. Looking at the wounds, they probably committed suicide. His corpse was found by the soldiers in the prison of the north borderline. The other 2 are the eldest and 5th sons of the king of the north borderline." Jiang Pengji silently calculated in her heart. All 9 princes of the north borderline had died in battle. She rubbed her brows and waved her hand. Send their corpses down and deal with them together. A family was particular about reunion and tidiness. Thinking about it this way, she felt that she was quite kind. Not long after, Fu Wang came over to report. My lord, all the people have been captured. Please make an inventory. In a place like Wangsheng, the number of nobles might be more than the number of mosquitoes. Fu Wang handed over a booklet. In it, the names of all the nobles of the north borderline were recorded in detail. Following the names were the number of their family members. The total number was close to 15,000. Jiang Pengji glanced at it briefly and put it aside. Her expression was cold and almost emotionless. She said, the army has surrounded Wangsheng so tightly that not even a drop of water can trickle through. Now, even a mosquito can't fly out. If there are any fish that slip through the net, Fu Wang, bring your head to see me. Fu Wang cupped his fists and said, this subordinate obeys. The deputy general followed behind Fu Wang and left. After walking far away, he asked hesitantly, General, those people. Have they all been killed? Chapter 1022. I beg you, please don't kill me. I beg you, I'll give you all the gold, silver, and jewels you want. I'll give you everything you want, just don't kill me. They begged for mercy, but the Grim Reaper was indifferent. Under the threat of death, these people broke down and lost control of their emotions. Lu Shi, you'll die a horrible death. Lu Shi. I curse you to never have a good death. Your daughter will be a prostitute and your son will be a thief. We'll be watching from hell. Mother, I'm so scared. I don't want to die. Mother. Father, where are you? I'm so scared. Fu Wang heard the shrill curse. He was already far away, but he still felt that someone was sobbing in his ear. If it was an ordinary person, he would feel terrible. But Fu Wang looked normal. Sigh. General, don't you think the Lord is too? The deputy general, who followed Fu Wang to carry out the slaughter order, could not bear it. His state of mind was not as strong and cold as Fu Wang's. He could not be blamed for being soft-hearted. The northern borderline barbarians deserved to die. He would kill a few of them without batting an eye. However, the old, weak, women, and children should be innocent. He even saw children who were less than a month old and women who were several months pregnant. Even though he sympathized with them, military orders were absolute. He had to order the archers to shoot randomly and execute all of them. After the execution, he had to check the bodies one by one and stab those who were still breathing. After doing this, the deputy general felt terrible. Fu Wang sneered and asked coldly, if your wife was raped by the northern borderline barbarians, your daughter was raped to death, your old mother couldn't escape the devil's claws, your father and brother were beheaded and their legs were chopped off, and you were the only one left of your bloodline, would you think that they were innocent? The deputy general was stunned. He did not seem to have thought of this possibility. If that's the case, of course I would want to bury the entire northern borderline. Fu Wang said, isn't that enough? Why are you so sympathetic? You think that the children of the northern borderline are innocent, but in my opinion, they are the least innocent. He would rather let 10 adults go than let a child with the blood of the northern borderline's nobility flow in his veins. Why? The deputy general shook his head disapprovingly. The child is still young and doesn't know anything. How can this be the same? Fu Wang stabbed the long axe in his hand into the ground, leaned on the railing of the camp, and let out a long sigh. Troubled times are different from prosperous times. In troubled times, there is no distinction between the old and the young. Fu Wang sneered and said, young children are far more threatening than adults. As for humans, whether they were dragons or bugs, they were basically fixed. They couldn't stir up any big waves. However, children were different. Who knew what kind of person this child would become in the future? It is precisely because we are children that we are easier to be used by others. We will grow old eventually. If the young master of the northern borderline is a great seedling, won't it leave hidden dangers for future generations? Don't be fooled by Fu Wang's boorish appearance and reckless and unruly temperament. He was actually meticulous like dust. He had the intuition of a wild wolf and a pair of eyes that could see through the fog and see the truth. But, that's just a possibility. The deputy general was a good, honest, and loyal man. Fortunately, he wouldn't interfere with military affairs, so Fu Wang didn't deliberately correct him. Not even the slightest possibility. Fu Wang squinted and glanced at the place where the screams gradually stopped. He said coldly, "The Lord wants to bring peace to the world, so she won't allow any hidden dangers that threaten the peace to exist." Why do you think the Lord wants to slaughter all the nobles of the northern borderline and not even let their relatives go? Because the nobles of the northern borderline have more connections and financial resources than ordinary people. They can easily do things that ordinary people can't do. They are also a greater threat than ordinary people, so they can't be tolerated. Although the northern borderline was a barren land, there were also smart people among the nobles. If the nobles were compared to the brain, and ordinary herdsmen were compared to the limbs of the body, then as long as the brain was removed, the torso and limbs would lose the command of the brain. How much combat power could they exert in the end? If these people are left alive, the northern borderline will recover in at most 20 years, and they will become a serious threat. At that time, new and old hatred will add up. Guess how many innocent people will die? It will definitely be more than 15,000. Fu Wang said confidently, "War will not only hurt the people of the Central Plains, but it will also be a burden to the people of the northern borderline. If these people's deaths can be used to exchange for more people's lives in the future, they will die a worthy death." The deputy general listened and was stunned for a long time. After a while, he said shamefully, "The general's state is extraordinary. I am ashamed." Fu Wang said honestly, "What extraordinary state?" "I'm just bluffing." The deputy general was dumbfounded. Fu Wang raised his hand and pulled out his weapon. He curled his lips and said, "The winner takes it all." If it was in the jungle, which wolf would not eat its prey because it is pregnant? If it does not eat its prey, it will starve to death. I really don't know how you have so much sympathy. The deputy general was speechless. After all, it was something that Jiang Pengji had instructed him to do. Fu Wang carefully compared the identity and age of each corpse and checked it again and again. He had to be careful. If there was a fish that escaped the net and came back 18 years later to take revenge and provoke a war between the barbarians and the Central Plains, how many people would die? Fu Wang yawned as he asked people to do the work carefully. To prevent people from being compassionate, Fu Wang sent out his trusted subordinates. Each one was colder and more ruthless than the other. Even if there was an outstanding beauty among the prisoners, they would stab her a few times without blinking until she breathed her last. Military advisor Wei? Fu Wang was busy. He did not expect an unexpected person to come to the tent. Observing the sky last night, I discovered that the stars in the night sky are strange. The destiny of the north borderline is not over yet. There seems to be a master of resurgence hiding. Fu Wang was so shocked that he lost all sleepiness. What? Master of resurgence? Fu Wang was stunned. Are you joking, military advisor Wei? Wei Ci lowered his eyes and said, "If you don't believe me, General Fu, you might as well check it out." Fu Wang asked, "Check? How?" When the left minister was young, he participated in the night bonfire and had intercourse with a shepherd girl and gave birth to a baby girl. The baby girl was secretly raised by the left minister and later became the legal wife of a member of the royal family who was down and out. The son that this woman gave birth to will be the person who will resurgence the north borderline in the future. Fu Wang was stunned. The left minister of the north borderline is Wu Liba. Wu Liba. Fu Wang hurriedly checked the register and found the page with Wu Liba's family. However, there was no illegitimate daughter as Wei Ci had mentioned. let alone any master of resurgence. Wait, I'll send someone to check. Military advisor Wei, please wait for a moment. Wei Ci was not in a hurry. He waited quietly, but his thoughts returned to his past life. The world had just been settled and the officials were worried about their children. Her Majesty wanted to appoint her eldest daughter, Changsheng, as the heir apparent but was repeatedly obstructed by the imperial censors. In less than 2 years, Her Majesty became pregnant for the second time, which was the blessed longevity. When she gave birth to the blessed longevity, the remnants of the Red Lotus group rose from the ashes under the leadership of one person. They even spread their teachings to the officials' residences. Chapter 1023. Although everything was under Her Majesty's control, and it was even the result of Her Majesty's deliberate actions, Wei Ci could not suppress the hatred in his heart when he thought of the assassin choosing to assassinate on Her Majesty's birthday. How could he not be? Just a little more, and both of them would die. He wished he could bear the risk for her. The person who led the Red Lotus group to obstruct Her Majesty was not anyone else. It was the fish that escaped the net that Her Majesty had accidentally missed when she attacked the northern borderline and slaughtered the nobles there. Wei Ci was personally in charge of the interrogation, so he was very clear about the person's background. He was the grandson of the wise Wu Liba. Calculating the time, this person was only 9 or 10 years old. As he was thinking, the tent was forcefully opened by Fu Wang. Military Counselor Wei is really amazing. The old man who served Wu Liba confessed. When Wu Liba was 16, he really got a shepherd girl pregnant and gave birth to an illegitimate daughter to be raised by an old minister of the family. Later, Wu Liba secretly married her to a branch of the royal family. Fu Wang walked too hastily, his breathing was slightly hurried, and his forehead was covered in sweat. Although it was a branch of the royal family, it was just an illegitimate child of the king of the northern borderline. So there was no record of this person in the royal family. I almost missed this family. Wei Ci asked coldly, have you caught the person? Fu Wang grinned. He said, when we sent people over, their family was about to escape. The few adults in the family saw that they could not escape and committed suicide. But didn't the military counselors say that they had a boy in their family? So we searched carefully. He looked like he was only 10 years old, but he was silly and did not have the aura of a master of resurgence. What about the child? Wei Ci asked. If this child was not killed, he would become a big problem in the future. Bring him here. Fu Wang shouted towards the outside, and a soldier brought in a little fatty who was tied up tightly. Wei Ci narrowed his eyes slightly, got up and walked to the little fat boy. He raised his hand and pinched his chin, carefully examining him. It's not this child. This child is fake. Wei Ci said with certainty, he was really replaced. Fu Wang was shocked. This is not true. The son of a servant. He doesn't look noble at all. His parents are slaves. How could he be the person Ci is looking for? Wei Ci had seen that fish that slipped through the net in his previous life. Even though the face of a 20-year-old youth and a 10-year-old child was different, it was impossible for there to be no similarities. Looking at this person's face, the past few generations of his family had been poor and lowly. It was impossible for him to be Wu Liba's grandson. Fu Wang's face darkened. Really? Wei Ci said, we'll know after interrogating this fellow. Fu Wang drew his sword and placed it on the fatty's neck, purposely intimidating him. Sure enough, the little fatty gave himself away. Damn it, Fu Wang's face turned green. His subordinates did not take their work seriously. As expected, he had to do it himself. He led a group of people to chase after them. After following the clues for more than 2 hours, they finally found the person hiding in a latrine pit in the wild. The latrine pit in the wild was not deep and was about the height of an adult. Fu Wang had never thought that the main character would be hiding here. What a scary fellow. No wonder he's that old bastard Wu Liba's grandson. That latrine pit was full of maggots and flies. Seeing that we went over to search, the fellow jumped in and hid there. He's not afraid of drowning in the feces. He's so calm at such a young age. It's really scary. Fu Wang returned close to dusk. He said to Wei Ci, that fellow is too smelly. Let the military advisor take a look at him after washing him. Wei Ci said coldly, he's someone who's about to die anyway. His corpse will rot eventually. There's no need to wash him. Fu Wang said, even so, we can't let him stink the military advisor. The ancients were still very afraid of ghosts and gods. Although Fu Wang did not believe in this, he would not make presumptuous judgments about things he did not know. No matter what, Wei Ci's little demonstration of his skills made Fu Wang feel a little more respect for him. I'll go take a look. Wei Ci, accompanied by Fu Wang, went to see the fish that slipped through the net. Although the fish that slipped through the net was only 10 years old, his appearance was already beginning to show. He had a handsome face and deep eyes. Wei Ci looked at him as if he could see through time and see the young man who was tied up in the dungeon. To be honest, if not for their different standpoints, Wei Ci would have quite admired him. To this day, Wei Ci still remembered what the young man said before he committed suicide. The traitor Lu massacred the people of the northern borderline. How many children who were crying piteously for food lost their birth parents? How many lonely old people lost their blood relatives? Millions of people, all died under her butcher knife. I just wanted to let her die with 2 lives, whether it was in the previous life or this life. Her Majesty was the enemy of the northern borderline. But, how could Her Majesty be the one who caused the situation in the northern borderline? Wei Ci looked at the young man's corpse that fell to the ground and muttered to himself, it's clearly chaotic times. Her Majesty just used her own method to end the chaotic times. She used the sacrifice of a few people in exchange for the peace of the world. If the young man really succeeded, the newly established Jiang dynasty would collapse, and chaos might even reappear. At that time, Changsheng was only 5 or 6 years old. Once Her Majesty died, how could Changsheng carry the country? What would become of the originally balanced court? However, Wei Ci would not let the regrets of the previous life reappear. The child in front of him had to die. Perhaps sensing Wei Ci's murderous intent, the child's brown eyes emitted intense hatred and murderous intent, like a young lone wolf. The child's breathing was slightly stagnant. He asked Wei Ci in not very fluent Chinese. You want to kill me? Wei Ci nodded. He raised his right hand, and the soldier beside him handed him his sword. Why? The child asked again. To cut the weeds and eliminate the roots, Wei Ci said softly. Do I need any other reason? To the child, Jiang Pengji had killed almost all of his relatives. He could already remember, and it was impossible for him to forget. This blood feud would not end until one of them died. The child's face was deathly pale. After a while, he felt the blood in his entire body turn cold. His body collapsed with a crash, and his blood dyed the soil beneath him. Wei Ci felt unprecedentedly relaxed as he sheathed his sword. Because of the previous example, Fu Wang was even more cautious in his work, and he completed the task Jiang Pengji gave him perfectly. You killed someone with your own hands? When Jiang Pengji learned of this, she did not care about the child's identity. Instead, she was concerned about the hidden reasons behind Wei Ci's actions. That child will be a hidden danger if we keep him. It's better to get rid of him as soon as possible. Jiang Pengji frowned and said, just kill him. Why do you have to do it yourself? Wei Ci said, mercy doesn't kill people. Jiang Pengji said, could it be that the child is a demon? Wei Ci said, what I kill is the demon in my heart. After killing the child with his own hands, Wei Ci truly felt that he could change the established future. Jiang Pengji was speechless. It was not until late autumn that Jiang Pengji completely conquered the entire northern borderline and annihilated all the nobles there. Just as she was about to heave a sigh of relief and enjoy the new year, she received a letter from Huang Song. Chapter 1024. A letter from Governor Huang? Could it be from the Mengs? Li Yun recalled the contents of the alliance between Huang Song and them. His heart tightened. Although the Mengs of Cangzhou are strong, it won't be easy for them to take advantage of Huang Song. Qiguan Rang fanned the feather fan in his hand, a cold smile on his lips. The light in his eyes seemed to be able to see through souls. Huang Song's letter has a deep meaning. Sun Wen, who was sitting beside him, felt the warmth being blown away by the cold wind. The old man furrowed his brows and secretly moved his mat to the side. He finally understood why Fengzhen and Wei Ci were unwilling to sit beside Qiguan Rang. The northern borderline was remote and the winter was colder than the central plains. It was late autumn, and everyone wished they could carry a hot water pot in their hands, a charcoal basin in their arms, and wrap themselves in warm clothes. Who would use a feather fan to fan themselves in this season? Unfortunately, the person beside him was that weirdo. Even though Sun Wen appeared calm, his brows twitched along with the rhythm of Qiguan Rang's fanning. He seemed to be enduring something. Everyone's attention was on Qiguan Rang. Only the audience sympathized with Sun Wen. Zibayako, I feel cold even through the screen. Master Qiguan really didn't do it on purpose? Dusk Sunset, I don't know if it was on purpose. I only know that Master Qiguan ruined the phrase, feather fan and silk cloth. Every time I read this phrase, I always think of Master Qiguan standing in the snow and ice, smiling and fanning himself. Wei Wei Chun Feng, to the one above, that's enough. Just thinking about that image makes me stick a few more heat pads. Occasionally holding a fan and pretending to be profound is pretentious and classy. Fanning yourself in the middle of winter is considered crazy. However, even if he was crazy, Qiguan Rang was still a Prince Charming. The audience laughed and chatted, but the atmosphere in the main tent was not so relaxed. It was like a lump of thick ink that could not be melted, making one feel strangely suffocated. Meaning? Military advisor Qiguan, I really can't tell. What meaning can there be in this? Li Yun read Huang Song's letter repeatedly. The first half was about greeting his lord and reminiscing about old times. The second half was a brief mention of the situation on the battlefield. Jiang Pengji formed an alliance with Huang Song so that the rear would not have any worries. The latter would help her stall the Meng family in Cangzhou. Qiguan Rang sneered, commandantly, do you really think that Governor Huang is so useless? The lord had already taken control of the northern borderline. Huang Song had many advisors under his command, but they couldn't do anything to the Meng family of Cangzhou. Li Yun thought about it carefully and said, although Governor Huang controls the land of a prefecture, Haozhou has only recently escaped from the chaos of war. In terms of wealth and military strength, Haozhou cannot compete with Tsang Prefecture. Prefecture Magistrate Huang delayed the Meng family for his lord, preventing the Meng family's army from entering the northern borderline. Yun thought that was their limit. Now that Prefecture Governor Huang's army is running low on provisions, it's normal for him to seek help from the lord. Qiguan Rang was about to speak when Jiang Pengji, who was sitting at the head of the table, suddenly interrupted. When did Bogeo become a prefecture overseer? Before the war at Beijiang, Huang Song had been a county governor. The officials in the tent, my lord, you've missed the point, Wei Ci said. A few months ago, the former Haozhou magistrate passed away due to illness. His sons were incompetent and none of them could inherit his father's position. His sons jointly recommended Huang Song, and Huang Song offered 100,000 dawn of provisions to the imperial court. The young emperor was very pleased and agreed to this matter, appointing Huang Song as the new Haozhou magistrate. When Huang Song was promoted, Jiang Pengji in the northern borderline were in a heated battle. How could she have the time to care about this matter? Jiang Pengji smacked her lips and a smile hung on her face. After all, which son doesn't want to inherit his father's family business? The position of Haozhou's prefecture magistrate didn't fall into the hands of his sons. Instead, it was taken by Huang Song. It would be a joke to say that his sons did it willingly. In troubled times, the one with the bigger fist had the final say. Huang Song's power spread throughout the entire Haozhou. If the position of prefecture magistrate fell into someone else's hands, Huang Song would be done for. Speaking of this, Jiang Pengji suddenly thought of a detail. Bogeo offered 100,000 dawn of provisions to the imperial court as a tribute. 100,000 dawn of provisions was not a small amount, but it wasn't a lot either. For an ordinary army, 100,000 dawn of provisions could last them for a while, but for the imperial court, it was just a drop in the bucket. Not to mention anything else, the salaries of the imperial court officials were huge food consumers. 100,000 dawn of provisions wouldn't take long. Feng Zhen laughed. I heard that the young emperor in Qinzhou is having a hard time. He owes the officials several months of salaries, and there are huge gaps in his expenses. Without the 100,000 dawn of provisions that Magistrate Huang offered as a tribute, I'm afraid the young emperor wouldn't even be able to afford his morning porridge. The royal family of Dongqing was now only an empty shell. Qinzhou is rich in resources and the people are rich. How can it not even provide for the daily expenses of the imperial court? Jiang Pengji hadn't paid attention to the news of the royal family for a long time. After the Huangshui meeting, the royal family was afraid that the feudal lords would seize their power, so they schemed against each other. Jiang Pengji left early with her people and focused on developing her own territory. After so many years, Jiang Pengji couldn't help but sigh when she heard that the royal family was in such a miserable state. The young emperor is young and ignorant. He doesn't know the hardships of the people. The Empress Dowager is the regent. She has illicit relationships with many ministers in private. She only thinks about enjoying herself all day long. How could she have the time to rectify the affairs of the imperial court? In the long run, even 10 Qinzhou wouldn't be able to withstand such extravagance, let alone 1 Qinzhou. Feng Zhen laughed. Moreover, before the fake emperor withdrew from Qinzhou, he plundered the wealth of the people. Qinzhou is no longer as prosperous as it once was. The fake emperor retreated after plundering, leaving only a dilapidated Qinzhou for the royal family. The young emperor was young and ignorant. The Empress Dowager was in the prime of her life. The mother was strong and the son was weak. The Empress Dowager was in charge of state affairs, but she didn't have any talent. She only knew how to enjoy herself and spend without restraint. It was expected that Qinzhou, which had already suffered a great loss of vitality, would end up in such a poor and weak state. Jiang Pengji tapped her fingers on the table and narrowed her eyes. Qinzhou, it's a waste of resources in the hands of the royal family. It was good enough that the royal family could gather 20,000 to 30,000 troops. Most of them were old, weak, sick, or disabled. How could they guard the huge Qinzhou? Feng Zhen said, "You're not the only one who thinks like you, my lord. It's just that no one dares to stand out." The royal family was dilapidated, but it was still the royal family. If they wanted to take Qinzhou, they would have to destroy the royal family. That meant tearing apart the last layer of Dongqing's fig leaf. The feudal lords were afraid that they would become the target of public criticism. Therefore, during the Huangshui meeting, none of the feudal lords dared to covet Qinzhou. But now, the situation was different. Jiang Pengji put the matter of Qinzhou aside and changed the topic to the core of the meeting. Just now, Han Mei asked. Wen Zheng hasn't given an answer. The corner of Qiguan Rang's mouth twitched. If his lord hadn't interjected and changed the topic to such a remote place, would Qiguan Rang have dragged it out and not answered? Qiguan Rang said, Commander Li has underestimated Magistrate Huang's ability. Chapter 1025. Jiang Pengji smiled and agreed. That's true. Bogeo's power isn't as great as the Mengs of Cangzhou, but it's not to the extent that he can't handle it. She had fought the northern borderline for 11 months, and Huang Song and the Mengs of Zhangzhou had also been in a stalemate for 11 months. Although she didn't understand the situation on the battlefield, Jiang Pengji believed that Huang Song wouldn't lose to the Mengs. Although the Mengs of Zhangzhou are strong, they can't withstand a prolonged battle. Moreover, the Mengs controlled Zhangzhou by force and are militaristic. They are already a spent force. Bo Gao is a smart man. His strategists are difficult to deal with. It's impossible for him not to see the weakness of the Mengs of Zhangzhou. In other words, Bo Gao only needs to defend the city walls, block the checkpoints, and not attack. The Mengs will suffer losses just by delaying the battle. Jiang Pengji smiled faintly. Her words were full of affirmation for Huang Song. If the Mengs send troops to attack, Bo Gao won't be defeated. Huang Song really couldn't beat the Mengs of Zhangzhou in a head-on battle. If it was just delaying the main force of the Mengs, Huang Song should be able to handle it with ease. However, Huang Song sent an urgent letter when Jiang Pengji had just taken care of the northern borderline. Thinking of this, Jiang Pengji's eyes flashed with coldness, and the corners of her lips curled up. Qiguan Rang bowed and said, "My lord is wise." A few civil officials were deep in thought. Their expressions were solemn. The generals followed the crowd and lowered their heads, pretending to be thinking. If one looked closely at their eyes, they would find that they were slightly confused. They obviously didn't understand. Towards this, the generals expressed their bitterness in their hearts. There was a group of highly intelligent people in the tent. As ordinary people, they were very stressed. Not only did the generals express that they didn't understand, but the audience in the streaming room also urgently called for the big shots. They urgently needed a big shot who was the representative of the language class for this segment that required brains. Otherwise, it would be like listening to a book from heaven. After many calls, a big shot finally appeared. Their bullet screens were also manually blocked by the idle people. Lo Siji Lianmeng, I'm glad I didn't miss today's streaming. Seeing Huang Song's letter, I have a feeling that it's finally happening. Thinking back to the past, the host and Huang Song were still a bunch of scoundrels who went to the brothel to drink wine together. They were good brothers, but now they were plotting against each other. Qiguan Rang had said that Huang Song's letter had a hidden meaning. I was stunned for a long time before I understood what he meant. This letter wasn't a conspiracy, but it was an open and above-board plot. The target of the plot was the host. Why did he say that? Judging from the conversation of the streamer and the others, Huang Song could not defeat the Meng family, but the Meng family could not do anything to Huang Song either. Huang Song did not need help at all. However, Huang Song still wrote a letter. Why? Because he couldn't let the host have any room for further development. Gue Kai Guofengxiu, we saw it too. The streamer has just finished fighting in Beijing. Although she won all the way, it wasn't easy. For this battle, the host had almost exhausted all of her family's assets. After fighting for almost 11 months, she could be said to have turned out in full force. There was a saying in Sun Tzu's Art of War that was very true. In war, victory was the most important, not the most important. What he meant was that the most important thing in a war was to win it quickly and not to prolong it. The streamer has just taken over the northern borderline, and the people's hearts are still unsettled. The subsequent investment in governance is an astronomical figure, and the expenditure is no less than the investment in war. If she didn't handle it well, the Beijing might rebound. Under such circumstances, it was really inappropriate for the host to continue fighting. Huang Song's request for help was actually throwing the enemy, who had not consumed much of their troops, to the host. If the war with the Meng family started, guess how long it would last? This was an open and above-board way to force the host to be militaristic. I really underestimated Huang Song in the past. This guy doesn't make any moves, but once he does, he makes people fall. This was an open and above-board plot. The host had dug a hole in front of her. She had to jump in even if she didn't want to. No matter what Huang Song's plan was, it was an indisputable fact that he helped the host to contain the Meng family's troops, so that the Meng family could not sneak attack the host from behind. Now that Huang Song had sent a letter asking for help, the host had no reason to refuse to send troops. No matter who won or lost, Huang Song could advance or retreat freely. Dense bullet screens floated in front of the eyes. Many of the audience saw the analysis of the big shots and felt a chill. Xiong Ben Papa gets dressed. This conspiracy theory is really scary. Did Huang Song really plot against the host? Yan Hua Ji Yuan, scratching my head. If I transmigrated, I feel that I wouldn't survive more than 3 episodes. Even Huang Song is so shrewd. How can transmigrators survive? When I saw Huang Song's letter, my first reaction was to send troops to suppress the Meng family. I didn't expect there to be so many tricks behind it. Host, why don't you send troops? Mo Lanji, it's impossible not to send troops. If you don't send troops, the host is really finished. Huang Song and Jiang Pengji formed an alliance. Not only did he shed all pretense of cordiality with the Meng family, but he also sent troops to help her contain the Meng family's troops for free. Now that Huang Song was in an emergency, Jiang Pengji was unwilling to send troops to help. If word got out, Jiang Pengji would immediately become the public enemy. It was precisely because she had no other choice that it was an open plot. It's too early to make a conclusion. Jiang Pengji broke the almost frozen atmosphere in the tent. She smiled and said, Bogeo sent a letter, so there must be a change in the war situation. He got involved because of me. Now that the northern borderline has been destroyed, there's no reason to let Bogeo continue to fight alone. She was determined to win Sangzhou. Sangzhou was the largest horse farm in Dongqing. Countless warhorses were bred there. This place was of great strategic significance and was a must-win for the military. Even if it was Huang Song, Jiang Pengji didn't want to give up this piece of cake. Huang Song had his own plans, and so did she. It was just a matter of who was more skillful. Lord Qiguan Rang frowned deeply, as if he wanted to say something. They had just conquered the northern borderline. If they rashly sent troops, their foundation would be unstable and others would take advantage of it. I know what Wenzheng is worried about, Jiang Pengji said calmly. I also want to cultivate and recuperate. The current situation doesn't allow us to do so. If we don't send troops, perhaps that Sangzhou horse farm will change its surname to Huang. At that time, Bogeo will control Haozhou and Sangzhou, then he will surround and take Qinzhou. If we are more ruthless, Bogeo will ally with the Su family from Zhe County, and we will become a dead end. Jiang Pengji's forces were all in the north. Now that she had conquered the northern borderline, it seemed powerful, but further south was the territory of Huang Song and the Su brothers. In other words, if Jiang Pengji wanted to expand further, she couldn't overcome these two forces. If she cultivated and recuperated, it was tantamount to giving the two families a chance to develop. It was better to take a risky move. Perhaps she could revitalize the whole chessboard. Moreover, Jiang Pengji's fingers played with the flame of the lamp on the table. Her eyes reflected the light of the fire. She said leisurely, in the battle at the northern borderline, we didn't lose much of our troops. Even if we fought with the Meng family from Sangzhou, it was far from the level of militarism. She was tired after fighting at the northern borderline, but her muscles and bones weren't injured. Most of her strength was still there. She still had the strength to fight again. Chapter 1026. Lang Jun is back. Zhu Qingming was embroidering in the hall. Hearing the servant's greeting, she quickly stood up to welcome him. Before she could take 2 steps, her Lang Jun had already stepped forward and stopped her. Why are you so careful? Nya Sun's lips curled up slightly. His bright smile made the cinnabar between his eyebrows as red as blood. He said, Wunyang has 2 bodies now. If anything goes wrong, won't you kill me? Zhu Qingming blushed and said in annoyance, Oh, I was wondering why you treat me so well. It turns out that it's because of my belly. Nia Sun did not panic in the face of this fatal question. Instead, he helped Zhu Qingning back to the main hall. Wunyang's words hurt. It's obvious that you love me so much that you value the child in your belly. You are all my treasures. I feel bad if I mistreat any one of you. Nia Sun helped Zhu Qingning to sit down. It's cold now. Remember not to wear so thin clothes. The room is very warm. You won't catch a cold, Zhu Qingning said. Now that the month is getting heavier, the clothes that were made a while ago are also tight. Zhu Qingning used her right hand to touch her slightly protruding belly. Her originally slim waist was slightly plump because of pregnancy. Although she lost her graceful figure, it added a bit of the unique charm of a mature woman. Ask someone to make a few more clothes. Not to mention 1 round, I can even put on 30 or 50 rounds. Before Nia Sun could finish his words, his ear was already pinched by a slim and soft hand. Zhu Qingning gritted her teeth beside his ear. 30 or 50 rounds? Not to mention 30 or 50 rounds, even if it's only 3 or 5 rounds, I'm afraid that you'll already have other beauties by your side. Nia Sun did not dare to struggle. He could only lean toward her according to her strength. His other hand held the mat to avoid really crushing her. Wunyang, who's gossiping in your ear? Do I look like that kind of person? Nia Sun tried his best to save his ear. Zhu Qingning pursed her lips and said with different intentions, I don't even have a place to walk. Who can gossip in my ear? But my body is getting heavier and sometimes it's inconvenient. I really need to arrange someone to serve you early. Nia Sun's parents were not around. Zhu Qingning did not have a mother-in-law to pressure her. Logically speaking, their married life should be very happy. As a matter of fact, they were indeed happy at the beginning, and their love for each other was joyous. As she got pregnant, her body became heavier and heavier, and she liked to overthink. Nia Sun frowned and joked, Madam is not such a virtuous person. Your husband still remembers what you said before we got married. If other women took a fancy to your clothes, jewelry, and rouge, you would give them to them generously as long as you had a good relationship with them. But if someone takes a liking to your husband, don't even talk about moving, even if you think about it for a moment, you have to teach that woman a lesson. Zhu Qingning's pretty face turned cold, and she snorted unhappily. You think I'm willing? Isn't it all because of that lord of yours? Why did she send you so many women for no reason? Zhu Qingning was pregnant, so it was easy for her to overthink. Looking at the young women in the residence, he felt as if something was stuck in his heart, making him feel extremely uncomfortable. She also knew that her husband was a man of integrity and would not touch dirty women, but he could not withstand accidents. His wife was pregnant and couldn't serve him. What if he couldn't control himself and secretly ate her? Rather than letting her husband cheat outside and touch unknown women, it was better to pick a woman he knew through and through. No matter which possibility it was, Zhu Qingning was not happy, and her emotions were on the verge of exploding. She was the youngest daughter that her father doted on the most, the pearl in his hands. Why should she push her husband to another woman? She couldn't do it. Nia Sun frowned. Although he had a clever mind, he was a man after all, and his thoughts were not on the same channel as a woman's. How did he know that his wife had been troubled these days because of the maids in the residence? After all, it's the Lord's good intentions, so it's not good to refuse. Leave them in the residence to look at, and if they don't feel good, we can just sell them. Nia Sun had never looked at the maids in the residence seriously. To him, the maids were just maids that served the madam. If these maids made the madam unhappy, they would naturally be sold. Nia Sun said with a smile, Madam used to be so decisive, why are you so indecisive now? Zhu Qingning let out a long sigh and said dejectedly, I don't know either. These days, I can't help but think too much, and I can't control myself. Nia Sun suggested, why don't you write a letter for me and ask my mother-in-law to come over and accompany you for a while? If there was a mother-in-law to enlighten her, the madam would not think too much and scare herself. Zhu Qingning shook her head, that's not appropriate. Mother is already old, and it's not good for her to travel. Nia Sun said, in that case, why don't I spend more time at home? Zhu Qingming smiled and curved her eyebrows. The couple snuggled and said a lot of words of love, and the atmosphere around them was filled with a romantic atmosphere. By the way, Qingyun, Zhu Qingming suddenly thought of something. Nia Sun answered vaguely. This morning, the housekeeper reported that he found a maid. This maid claimed to be my husband's wet nurse. Zhu Qingming knew that her husband had been looking for his background. He found it in Dongqing from Zhongzhou, but the clues were cut off. Even after joining Huang Song, Nia Sun did not give up on the journey to find his roots. My wet nurse? Over the years, Nia Sun had seen too many liars who wanted to pass off fake eyes as genuine, so he was very suspicious of the identity of this wet nurse. Zhu Qingming said, "Does Lang Jun want to see her?" Nia Sun closed his eyes slightly, and the bright red cinnabar between his eyebrows became brighter. He said, "Then let's meet." The couple had dinner together. Nia Sun coaxed Zhu Qingming to sleep, and then left to see the so-called wet nurse. You said, you are my wet nurse? Nia Sun looked coldly at the old woman who was kneeling in the hall. The old woman had been waiting for a day in fear. When she heard Nia Sun's voice, which was clear and pleasant, she could not help but look up. When she saw it, she suddenly froze on the spot, and her lips moved. Really like, the old woman murmured, as if she was recalling something. Seeing her performance, Nia Sun suddenly became a little interested, and asked with a smile, like what? The old woman said with tears in her eyes, Second Lang Jun and Madame Zhen are too similar. Madame Zhen? Nia Sun frowned, feeling that there might be a different harvest this time. Who is the Madame Zhen you are talking about? The old woman said, Madame Zhen is Second Lang Jun's biological mother. Nia Sun did not believe her. There were many people who looked alike in the world. Apart from that, there were many loopholes in some places. The old woman said that he was the child of a Madame Zhen, and claimed to be his wet nurse. From this, it could be seen that Madame Zhen's husband's family should be well off. Since they were well off, how could a newborn boy be abducted and sold, and end up in Zhongzhou? Nia Sun asked, do you have any evidence for what you said? The old woman said, I remember clearly that Second Lang Jun was born with cinnabar between his eyebrows. When he was born, he was plump and beautiful. Nia Sun was speechless. Chapter 10:27. The old woman saw Nia Sun's unhappy expression and knew that she had said something wrong, so she quickly tried to remedy it. I still remember one thing, she said hurriedly, there was a red mole on the inside of your right thigh. After the old woman said this, Nia Sun's expression changed slightly. Other than his servants and his wife, no one else knew about his unique features, not to mention his inner thighs. Nia Sun had a feeling that maybe he could find the answer to the mystery that had puzzled him for many years from the old woman. The old woman cried, Second Lang Jun, I really didn't lie to you. Every word is true. Nia Sun suppressed his emotions. Other than that? The old woman choked. She thought she had said something wrong, so she said in a trembling voice, other than that, you look like Madame Zhen. When I saw you just now, I thought I saw the newly married Madame Zhen. What a beautiful person. Unfortunately, a beautiful woman has a short life. Nia Sun didn't know what expression to show. He knew that he was very beautiful, and he could outshine all the other beauties with just a little makeup, but he didn't like people talking about his appearance. His appearance was not as pure and unparalleled as Wei Xi's. Instead, he had an oppressive beauty. Because of his outstanding appearance, Nia Sun was often bullied as a girl by the Nia family when he was a child. Nia Sun still remembered the embarrassment and humiliation of being surrounded by people against the wall and being forced to take off his pants to prove that he was a man. Are you serious? The old woman said, of course. Madame Zhen was very beautiful. It's hard to forget her. You said that a beautiful woman has a short life. Did she die early? Nia's son didn't dare to ask for specific information. He always felt flustered, so he only dared to ask for some trivial information. The old woman shook her head like a rattle drum. She said, Madame Jeanne is alive and well now. Nia's son heard this and felt a little bad. His parents' family was not bad. Why did they abandon him? Nia's son took a deep breath. Tell me everything you know. The old woman nodded, but hesitated before she spoke. Second Lang Jun, if I tell you, can you give me some money and food? My family's life is difficult. If it weren't for the fact that they were too poor, the old woman wouldn't have come to Nia's son to try her luck. She wasn't sure if Nia's son was the baby boy from back then. After all, she was the one who had buried the baby boy into the ground. Who knew that he was still alive? When she mentioned the red mole on her thigh, the man's expression changed drastically. It seemed like they were the same person. Nia's son frowned deeply and waved his hand to signal his servant to bring a plate of silver to the old woman. There were 20 ingots. The old woman's hands trembled as she stroked the silver. She was so happy that she didn't hesitate to speak. Second Lang Jun, what do you want to know? I will tell you everything I can. The old woman suppressed her excitement, and the wrinkles on her face squeezed together with a smile. Nia's son asked, Who are my parents? Why did they abandon me? The old woman was stunned for a moment. She sighed and said, Second Lang Jun, you were not abandoned. Nia's son was startled. Not abandoned? The old woman nagged. This old servant was Madame Jeanne's dowry maid, and later married a manservant. Madame Lai gave birth to eldest Lang Jun, but she couldn't win back the master's heart. Instead, she was suppressed by the master's favorite concubine. Later, Madame Jeanne and the concubine got pregnant at the same time. Even so, the master still didn't look at Madame Jeanne. Madame Lai risked a difficult labor and gave birth to you for a day and a night. That concubine also gave birth to a son. The master favored the concubine and neglected the wife. He couldn't bear that the concubine's son was treated as a concubine's son, so he simply swapped you two. Nia's son felt like he was listening to a heavenly book. He was so angry that he laughed. Which family has such a strange upbringing? Mixing the legal son and the concubine, and pretending to be the legal son? When Nia's son heard the truth, he began to doubt whether his ears were playing tricks on him. How could there be such a ridiculous thing? The old woman saw that Nia's son was angry, and she hurriedly said, This is absolutely true, but according to the rumor, it seems that Madame Lai was not content with her marriage and secretly had an affair with a servant and gave birth to you. Outsiders said so, but this old servant dares to curse that Madame Lai is innocent and has never done anything wrong to the master. It must be the master's concubine who made it up and slandered Madame Jeanne's innocence. Nia's son quickly calmed down, and his expression didn't change. I have a question. The old woman didn't know that danger was coming. Instead, she wore a flattering smile. Second Lang Jun, please ask. Nia's son said, You should be the concubine's servant, right? The old woman was so scared that her face turned ashen, and her legs were trembling. This, Nia's son said indifferently, mixing the legal son and the concubine's son is such a big thing. There should be very few people who know about it. Not only do you know about it, but you even claim to be my wet nurse. It can be seen that you must have taken care of me in the past, so you know that I have a red mole on my leg. In that case, I have another question. How did I leave the mansion and end up being sold? The old woman opened her eyes wide in astonishment. She was so scared that she retreated on her knees. She didn't even dare to look at the plate of silver. Second Lang Jun, Nia's son got up from the table, raised his hand, and pulled out the sword at his waist. The tip of the sword was against the old woman's throat. Tell me the truth. The old woman cried and said, Every word I said is true. The concubine saw that you looked too much like Lady Chang. She was afraid that you would arouse Lady Chang's suspicion during the elders' meeting, so she asked me to send you out of the mansion. She even ordered me to bury you. Hearing the word bury, Nya Sun was basically sure that the old woman was telling the truth. Nya Sun followed the clues to Dongqing and asked many people. The first person who found Nya Sun was a farmer's wife. She accidentally heard crying in the ground, so she dug out the dying Nya Sun from the soil. The farmer's wife didn't take care of him. Instead, she sold him to a human trafficker. Because Nya Sun was good-looking, he was more expensive than a normal baby boy. After a few twists and turns, Nya Sun ended up in Zhongzhou. Coincidentally, he was adopted by a side branch of the Nya family. Nya Sun asked the old woman in a low voice. Tell me, who are my birth parents? Although Nya Sun came to find his birth parents, he didn't have much feelings for them. He just wanted to find his roots. If his birth parents lost him because they had no other choice, Nya Sun could consider helping them. If his birth parents abandoned him on purpose, he would make them regret it. Nya Sun didn't want to acknowledge anything, not to mention giving birth. In his opinion, the essence of giving birth was just one sentence. When a man and a woman get together, they have children. The mother was pregnant for 10 months, and the father was just a night of pleasure. They had the right to give birth to him, but they didn't have the right to take his life. The old woman looked at Nya Sun's gloomy face, and her heart couldn't help but tremble. She said with a trembling voice, Second Langjuan's birth father is the leader of the Meng family in Sangzhou. His surname is Meng, and his name is Zhan. His birth mother is the daughter of a concubine from the Gu family in Langya. Her name is Gu Zhen. She has now remarried to Lu Shi, the second legitimate son of the Lu family in Hejin. I heard that Lu Shi is quite famous now. Second Langjun. I'm telling the truth. Nya Sun was speechless. Say it again. I didn't hear it clearly. The old woman closed her eyes and looked like she was facing death calmly. She repeated it intermittently. Nya Sun was so shocked that he took a few steps back. The sword in his hand fell to the ground. Chapter 1028. The night was dark. Raindrops the size of beans hit the window, making a pitter-patter. The candlelight was slightly intoxicating, and the shadows were reflected on the paper window, swaying. The shadows of the trees were like strange arms, shaking with the storm. The sound of thunder outside woke Zhu Qingming up from his sleep. She suddenly sat up, and the quilt covering her rolled up to her lower abdomen. The surrounding cold air rushed to Zhu Qingming. Langjun? She raised her hand to touch the side of her body, and found that the other side of the bed was cold. Langjun hasn't come back to bed yet? Zhu Qingming was a little worried. She picked up the fur coat hanging at the head of the bed and put it on. She picked up a lamp and went to find Nya Sun. Seeing that the candle in the study was still lit, Zhu Qingming walked over slowly. She opened the paper door, and a strong smell of alcohol hit her face. Langjun? Zhu Qingming had known Nya Sun for a long time, but she had never seen him drunk. Even if it was the Lord's banquet, he would control his alcohol tolerance. But now, looking at the scattered wine jars beside Nya Sun, Zhu Qingming's heart tightened, and she hurried forward. Wunyang? Nya Sun was a good drinker. Not to mention that he was only half drunk. Even if he was completely drunk, he wouldn't go crazy. He would just sit there obediently. Langjun, what happened? Zhu Qingming took out a handkerchief and wiped the wine stains on Nya Sun's mouth. She felt distressed and thought about all the things that had happened recently. It seemed that only the wet nurse could make Nya Sun lose his composure. She said, Langjun, if you can't find your family, then you can't find them. You still have me and the child in your belly in the future. Why do you want to ruin your health for a pair of parents you have never met? Nya Sun opened his drunken eyes, and it took him a long time to regain his senses. He raised his hand and rubbed his swollen temples. He held Zhu Qingming in his arms like he was holding a child. His chin was on her neck, and he said vaguely, Wunyang. I finally found. Zhu Qingming was surprised. Found? Isn't this a good thing? Why did you drink so much? Nya Sun's arms rubbed her shoulders, and his hands were on her belly. He had a bitter smile on his face. This is not a good thing. Wunyang, do you know who my biological parents are? Zhu Qingming asked, who is it? Nya Sun whispered in her ear. Zhu Qingming was not a foolish woman and immediately grasped the center of gravity. It's actually. Apart from you and me, does anyone else know about this? Zhu Qingming sucked in a breath of cold air. If her husband had such a background, he would be in an awkward situation now. This matter is of great importance. How can it be spread out so easily? Nya Sun shook his head. He said, this matter must be kept a secret. Meng Zhan didn't raise me, but he gave birth to me. In the eyes of the world, a son was still a son, and a father was still a father. No matter how wrong the father was, the son could not disobey. However, Meng Zhan was a stumbling block in his master's way. He had to be removed. If this husband's identity were to be spread out, I'm afraid that some people with ulterior motives would make a fuss about it. I'm not worried, but I'm afraid I'll implicate you and the child. Nya Sun didn't want to acknowledge Meng Zhan's kindness, but he couldn't stand the gossip of others. Zhu Qingming was heartbroken by Nya Sun's words. He didn't care if Meng Zhan lived or died. She thought that her husband's life was rough enough, but she didn't expect him to experience so many unknown hardships. However, Zhu Qingming said in a low voice, Lang Jun, why don't you avoid the Mengs? There is no such thing as an impenetrable wall in the world. The mystery of Lang Juan's identity is a hidden danger. If someone with ulterior motives uses it, how will you live in the future? It's better to be a bystander and watch. Nya Sun felt bitter in his mouth. Didn't he want that too? But the world was full of tricks. Some things couldn't be avoided even if one wanted to. Meng Zhan was my benefactor, but he mixed up the official and the concubine to harm me. This debt of gratitude is offset. Nya Sun reeked of alcohol, but his eyes were calm. In his position, he has to make his own plans. Since I'm loyal to the Lord, of course I have to make plans for him. For Nya Sun, Meng Zhan was just an enemy he was going to plot against. Zhu Qingming's throat was stuck. She wanted to persuade him, but she swallowed her words in the end. Lang Jun, be careful. Nya Sun sighed and patted his wife's back. He said gently, I know. The couple hugged for a long time. Zhu Qingming suddenly thought of someone. If what the wet nurse said is true, there shouldn't be many people who know about Lang Juan's background. As long as they don't say anything, how will others know? Zhu Qingming's eyes turned cold. She gripped her sleeves and said harshly, that wet nurse. Lang Jun, have you thought about how to deal with her? Nya Sun's lips curled into a smile. He said, I've dealt with her thoroughly. Dead people wouldn't reveal the truth. Even without Zhu Qingming's reminder, Nya Sun wouldn't let the old woman have a chance to live. In addition, Nya Sun also sent the old woman's family away that very night. He gave them a large sum of money for settling down. Zhu Qingming's nerves relaxed. The smell of alcohol made her feel uncomfortable. Lang Jun, you've already made up your mind. Why are you still worried? Nya Sun sighed. He said, Wunyang, you don't know. I'm not worried about my background. I'm worried about the Lord. The Lord? Is the Lord making things difficult for you? No. Why is he making things difficult for me? Nya Sun laughed. The Lord is good in every aspect, but he's a little suspicious. If my background is exposed, it's not a big deal. I'm just afraid that the Lord will be suspicious. After all, Meng Zhan's first wife is now Lu Shi's second wife, Lu Shi's stepmother and aunt. With this relationship, even if I tell others that I don't recognize it, they might not think so. People always thought that blood ties could not be broken. Even if the bones were broken, the tendons were still connected. From this, it could be concluded that Nya Sun was Gu Zhen's son. He would definitely side with the Liu family. It was obviously a robber's theory, but countless stupid people regarded it as a standard. Zhu Qingning exclaimed softly. After a while, she said, Lang Jun is loyal to the Lord. He's not the kind of person who changes his mind. I can't stop the Lord from thinking too much. Zhu Qingning was unconvinced. How can it be like this? Isn't Feng Bijie's second brother also working under Lu Shi? Feng Ju was Huang Song's most trusted official in Haozhou. Nie Sun said, Huijie and the Lord have been close friends since they were young. Their relationship is extraordinary. How can it be the same? Zhu Qingning's face turned pale. She muttered, Lang Jun has already dealt with the wet nurse. No one should know about this. Nie Sun smiled bitterly. It's hard to say. Zhu Qingning looked at her husband in confusion. Nie Sun coughed softly and said in a low voice, I'm afraid that I've offended Lu Shi badly. Outsiders say that he's open-minded and carefree. But from my point of view, no matter how petty he is, he's still vengeful. How did you offend him? Nie Sun said, I came up with a plan for the Lord. Zhu Qingning blinked and asked, and then? Nie Sun coughed softly again, you're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.